being recorded. We starting the recordings, and y'all go ahead and enjoy yourself. Y'all ain't gotta come on. Y'all gonna eat and relax. Okay, yeah. It's being recorded, so and y'all can probably hear me yelling back from back there anyway.
You know, I came down here to learn, right?
That's a good thing. That's what we like to do here. We all learn. It can be fun. It could be fun. But the Bible say, "Happy is the man that getteth understanding."
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I believe he said for the it's better than I missed the word.
I think I know where you're going with that.
Yeah. Basically, it's better than silver and gold.
Silver and gold, yes, it is. Yep. So, part 3, if I remember, in the Phil Gasper, which I just keep forgetting to bring my copy of Phil Gasper. I believe it's paragraph 46. I seen Brother Alonzo. He said he was actually coming tonight. I seen him today.
For part 3, you said?
Part 2.
Oh, I thought I heard 3. I was like,
no,
I missed more than I thought.
No, not. We're almost there. I think we got one more week. So next week we should finish this one off. Page 25 in the internet copy. I believe it's 46 in the Phil Gasper. I believe. We're starting off. It says, but you communists would introduce community of women, screams the bourgeoisie in chorus.
Yes, please.
Okay, so what he's doing, again, Karl Marx is arguing against the rumors that have been spread by the ruling class. And I've come to find out that's true too, because, after a while I get wind that some people were, like I told you before, had some foul to say, or rumors just to pass on this end too. So Karl Marx is addressing this as well, but that's not really what we want to get into today. Oh, snaps. I forgot another text. I wonder as I wander. Okay. Yeah, feel free. Yeah. Yeah, make sure that they work. And if you need a little writing pad, there's a pad down there. You might take something off of it in that white box. And it's if those don't work, it's a couple up here, but some of them should get work. So we're going to look at what he's going to get into, and again, it's some text we want to bring in tonight. But one thing I want to focus on as we begin to close in part 2. I actually probably said part 3, but one thing I want to bring is the attention that Marx and Engels, what they're bringing concerning ideas, and because it's ideas that that's how we say conceptualize things. These are ideas, and often the way that we conceptualize things, when we read certain things, it also affects our perceptions. So what we were looking at, what Marx was bringing it earlier, I believe it was last week, he was bringing to the table how the society, law, culture, and, I guess to sum it up, it's culture, it's reasonings. It is brought forward, or it has been spawned from the capitalist society. So in essence, what we have are capitalist ideas. Even if we come up with an idea that we think is going to help liberate the people, if we don't understand, as I said before, dialectical materialism, meaning assessing the situation, the material world around us, and understanding the science of the material world around us outside of the capitalist views, we can mess things up, or we find ourselves running in a circle. And we're going to look at some of that today as well, so we can really learn why it's so important for us to understand things outside of the capitalist or the ruling class reasoning. I mean, it affects all of our lives. I mean, almost every aspect, even how we interpret and read the Bible. You know, if we have these capitalist ideas, we read that Bible, you know, we may see things in there or perceive things in there that really isn't so. You know, it really isn't what the Bible's teaching, but it's just the way that we understand it. Brother Jamila, mute your mic for us. Mute your mic for us. We can back. Thank you. So that's one thing I want to bring to the table. And right now, as I read, he said, but you communists. This is what Marx is saying that the ruling class say. He said, you communists introduce community of women. And this is what he's saying the bourgeoisie screams in the chorus. You know, they try to accuse this, the communist movement of sharing females or women. And that's an abomination. That's not the truth at all. In fact, you will find it in a capitalist society, more or less. So this is going to lead us into something else as far as women in general. Again, from a capitalist society, inside of a capitalist society, what we're taught about women, it can skew our reasoning, even in the liberation struggle. And I have learned, the more I have learned about the society of justice, it have really, far as I'm concerned, brought to light a lot of things that's in the Bible. And I remember my teacher years ago said the same thing, that how men in general, they're not taught to really have empathy towards the female part of the species of man. And I've come to learn that's true. That is very much true. And often when we think about the liberation struggle, you know, we don't really see women's role in it. And I'm gonna tell you something before I get going, because I don't want to ramble on, but I want to just establish some things. Now, for the women and the men and women who listen, I want you to understand this. What led to this idea of Black people so-called being ignorant? You may find it rooted in slavery. Okay, and I'm going somewhere with this. Now, if you notice, what happened during slavery, they took a people who had a culture and education, and they took it, right? And these people became ignorant. They didn't know how to read, they didn't know how to write, they didn't know the culture. And if you stand back and you analyze what this created an environment where no one will call the Negro, so-called Negro, to any discussions of science or knowledges of culture or art. It's not that he didn't have the capacity or the capability to be masters in these things, but no one will call him to that because society created an environment where the Negro just didn't allow him to read. So what you've seen of him, he was just ignorant. So he wouldn't be a man of science. He wouldn't be a man of art. You know, he would just be, or a woman of science or a woman of art. I'm bringing this out for us to understand how the environment could shape our perceptions of things. So you would never consider them to be educated. You would never bring them to the table to be educated. But once they were educated, you will find out that they are a human being and they prevail in sciences and art and everything else. So the same thing has happened with women. See, if you look across the globe, it has been a struggle for women to be educated. And I don't want people to get this confused, because I was accused of this some years ago, many years, well, probably some people still accuse me of it today, of being a chauvinist, a male chauvinist. And I wouldn't lose any sleep over that, because I know that wasn't me. But what I have to bring to the table, well, at least I believe that wasn't me. I don't look at women as beneath anything or me above them. Now, I have things misunderstood on their roles. Now, let me explain why now. If you have created an environment across the globe where in certain countries, 99% of the women are illiterate, if you have created an environment where women haven't been given the ability or the freedom or the liberty to exercise sciences and arts, then they don't really have anything to bring to the table. So they feed into this prejudice, not on purpose, but they feed into that prejudice just because of the circumstance that they have been put in, just like you would find with a slave in years ago. So that's why I push big on the women. Shalom, Sister Wanda, shalom. That's why I push big on the women being educated. Because I'm going to tell you this, a man isn't just going to be heard because he's a man. And a woman isn't just going to be heard just because she's a woman. A man and a woman have to have something to say. So therefore, what I mean by that, they both must be educated. So on this end, I believe that the women have a voice. The scriptures say that they are to be filled with the Spirit of the Almighty, and they're not filled with the Spirit just to teach kids. All right. Now, but in order for this realization to happen, we're pushing that the women must be educated. They must be educated in the revolution. They must be educated in the scriptures. They must be educated in the environment, in the world in which they're living in. And we say the same thing for the man. Okay? So when we look into this, remember these ideas. This is what the capitalists have created. The woman is really nothing but a domestic slave. That's what the capitalists have created. And they only freed the woman insofar as to go work for the capitalists. Okay? Because they know of the dedication and the labor and the intelligence that they do have, and they're willing to exploit it. Okay? So in our liberation struggle, especially the struggle for the kingdom of God, man and women have to have their rightful place. Just like Thomas Sankara said when he began to turn around Burkina Sofa. When he began to turn that around, he went on a big educational campaign to educate the women. Okay? He said he knew that the revolutionary struggle would not be complete without women. Chairman Mao went on the same road, educating the women, went all through China, educating them, all of the peasants, women included. Vladimir Lenin did the same thing in the liberation struggle in 1917. Everywhere you go, every liberation struggle, Maurice Bishop, every liberation struggle that I have read about, it's not just men, but women being educated. You got to be. And that's what we push in here. Okay? You got to be educated. So when the sisters have something to say, then she got to know what she's saying. But it's the same thing we're saying for the men. Okay? You got to know what you're saying, or else I'll say the same thing. Well, listen, brother, you probably need to sit down for a little while and get some more instruction. Okay? But that's just man or women. It's just human beings. Even myself, if I'm struggling in the area, I know I need to sit down. I need to get some learning in this area. All right? So all of this because we're leading into a new way of thinking. Okay? This is a new way of thinking. Like Paul said, renewing the mind, a new way of thinking. And so we're going to look into this a bit as far as our ideas and what we got to bring to the table, what the kingdom of God is explaining. And I want you to remember, I have said it before, you could do your own research. 2,000 years ago, for women to be sitting at the feet of the master teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, right among the men, you can argue that was a revolutionary move. You know, that was because normally they probably wouldn't even be in the same room unless they were serving. but to sit down and learn, and for the master teacher himself to tell another woman, you need to sit down and learn too. That was a change in the paradigm of that Roman world. Okay. Now, here in the manifesto, page 25, 46 in the Phil Gaspers, 46, or should I say the 46th paragraph, maybe in the Phil Gasper, page 25 in a internet copy, up at the top of the page, it says, "But you communists would introduce community of women," screamed the bourgeois in chorus. The bourgeois sees his wife a mere instrument of production. Now, I want you to realize what I just finished explaining. How the capitalists think. They raise up people in their society to think the same way. All right, our ideas are rooted in their principles. All right, so notice how he thinks. His wife is just a mere instrument of production. Okay, whether it's just to produce children, or you may have this form of polygamy where is actually opposite of the Torah form of polygamy, where you have the man who send his women to work and they support him. And that's, if you wasn't rich, that's how a lot of men did it in polygamy. So when we read the Torah, as we deal with our other discussions on polygamy, you will find out where we go and how the Torah was sort of discouraging this idea of polygamy by putting these restrictions in a way, by putting it on a man that you must, if you're going to do it, you must take care of who you bring into the table as your so-called wife. But on the other end, you have men who have these different women to enrich himself. You may seen it really on the exploitive end, as you may see, the black market, what they call pimps. That's what they call the black market guys who on the streets. But you have professional pimps as well. And notice the point, though. They use the women as mere instruments of production. Marx continues, he hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common, and naturally can come to no other conclusion that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. So Marx is simply saying our preceding chapters, we've been proving, or he's been proving, that what must be shared in common are the instruments of production, which are the land, the resources, everything we need to provide for ourselves, the timber, the copper, the water, all of the means of production. So since the bourgeoisie look at the women as a means of production, Marx is being sort of sarcastic here. Since you got to share all of the means of production, the rich are saying, since the women is like a commodity of production, like a factory or piece of equipment, they saying you got to share her too. And this is what Marx is sort of being sarcastic, showing or trying to prove or make the point how the capitalist society views women. Okay, they're just instruments to produce. And I remember watching a guy who first invented the TV dinners. And when his company made the TV dinner, he was introducing the TV dinners on the news, some kind of news media. And he said, well, these will liberate women from the kitchen. I remember him saying that. And because the capitalists made it seem like the kitchen is an oppressive room, and under the circumstances when you are robbed of everything and you're reduced to just a couple of rooms in the kitchen, yes, that could complement it. But what is the kitchen really? An elder told me that the kitchen is the nutrition room. That's what he called it. It's a room where you help bring life to your family. It's a room which, it nourishes your family. However, under capitalism, and because we're in captivity, it appears to be oppressive in one sense, and it feels oppressive in one sense. It's not the kitchen per se. It is the capitalists who have robbed everything from us. It's the capitalists who cause us to have to buy back our necessities. this is what really creates this oppressive kind of feel that the women and men have, especially the women. So he said he's going to liberate the women from the kitchen, but he didn't tell them that he's just going to bring them in shackles into the capitalist society. So you're no longer just going to labor for your family. What you're going to do, you're going to labor for the capitalists under harsh conditions. Okay, and like we said before, what the women have experienced in these jobs and what they have to go through just to keep their jobs is an abomination. And so he's saying now, he says he has not even a suspicion that the real point aimed at, speaking of the communists, their real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. You see with the communists, that's why the ruling class don't want you to know nothing about communism. I mean, what we have read so far. You know, when I began to read and understand this stuff, this was liberating. But I never really was against communism one way or the other. Was I for it? Not necessarily. I didn't know much about it. But I've heard bad things about it being atheist and all this other stuff. But it really wasn't nothing that I really would fight, like, you know, say they just bad. So I was willing to give it a shot. But the more I've learned, you can learn a lot from what these communists are bringing to the table and their method of interpreting the world around us is very interesting. And now what we're learning here, they see that the capitalists use the women as instruments of production. So the communists want to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. And the first method in doing that is what? Education. Education. You got to be educated. Then you would know your role, you know. It's the same thing for a slave. At one time, slaves didn't even know how to sleep in a bed. He didn't even know. Booker T. Washington said he had to teach the former slaves who was coming to his school how to sleep on sheets. They didn't know what they were for. So education is really very important. So he says, for the rest, nothing is more ridiculous. Speaking of this community of women, this is what he's saying. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of our bourgeois at the community of women, which they pretend is to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women. It has existed almost from time immemorial. In other words, they've been doing this already. They've been exploiting women and doing this from the beginning of time, according to Marx. But we know, or what we will argue here at this school, it began to happen during the days of the rise of Cain and his society. And then after that, it began to rise again during the days of Nimrod in his society. And he said, from time immemorial, he continues, our bourgeois not content with having wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, take the greatest pleasure in seducing each other wives. So notice he's describing the capitalist society. The rich men, as they bring the women, the poor laboring women, into the working arena, in order for them to keep their jobs, you find a lot of sexual harassment. Right now, what they call it nowadays, sexual harassment. So he said they wasn't just content with taking their workers' wives, but they also use or deal in prostitution. Okay? And they take the pleasure dealing with prostitutes, the poor people, women, and they also take pleasure in dealing with one another wives. And these scandals go on to this very day among the ruling class. To this very day, you know. And Marx continues, bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce, in substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. So he's saying it's hypocritically concealed. They act like they are faithful men in the society, but because of the big industry of prostitution, because of the assault on the poor working women among the bosses, he's saying it's all hypocritical. And among one another, they all sleeping around with one another. Okay? And I heard that was going on during the days of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, because I met a guy at work who's heavy into that history. He said, man, they had a bunch of that stuff going on. A bunch of them had diseases and everything else because they was running around swapping one another women and cheating on one another wives. And Marx is saying here, this is the hypocritically concealed operation of the ruling class. So he's saying, now it's them who have the community of women. It's them who's exercising that. Just like he has argued, they want to say that the communists want to take away the people's land. No, it's the ruling class who have already taken away the people's land. Okay, so now Marx is bringing to the table thus far all of this indictment that they have been putting against the communists. We actually find it in a system that we are living in today in all of the ruling class. And then when I begin understanding stuff, the communists are more in tune to the Bible than the capitalist religious society. And people say, well, I'm not a capitalist. Well, you know, deep down, many people want to be. Okay, that's what they're waiting on. Now, he continues, for the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women springing from this system. So he's showing how this system also causes this exploitation of women in so many words. And like I talked about last week, I don't want to get all into it, but if you even look at marriage, because the society in which we live in, the ruling class owns the means of production, that when men and women are becoming, they come of age to be married, what hinders them is that the ruling class say that you have to earn a certain amount of income because you have to provide for a family. And in primitive societies, it wasn't like that. The resources were available. There was nothing stopping a young man and young woman to get married. Now it is a hurdle to get married. And what is that hurdle? Capital. You have to go earn capital from somebody or for yourself in order to even be married. All right. Or they say you can't afford it. All right. So what does this create? More chaos among men and women. It creates more lewdness and fornication. This is coming from the capitalist society, though. Think about it. If you were in a communist society or a society where everything's shared, you know, the community, young man, young woman want to come together. What do the community go do? They go get the resources and build them a house. They don't have to pay no 100,000, 200,000, $500,000, $250,000 for a house to live in, and then got to pay utilities and taxes. This is the capitalist society that put a strain on marriages. And what happens since no one is married now? What happens? People break up, bounce around here and there. You know, we go and just research how many people break up over finances. I've been watching some stuff on old cases and stuff like that where how many people killing one another for the life insurance. It's terrible. I'm talking about couples. So this is what the communists want to destroy, all right? Now, I didn't bring the text today, but it was a book. It's called I Wonder as I Wander. It was written by Langston Hughes, all right? And I wanted to bring it today, but I didn't. I forgot it. And the reason why I wanted to bring it because Langston Hughes went on a tour throughout the USSR. They were recruiting people to come to, black people specifically, to come to the USSR because they knew how black folks were being treated. They wanted them to come to the USSR to make a movie. It was supposed to have been a slave movie showing how the blacks was to be free or liberated from the capitalist slave owners. Well, they never did the movie, but they took Langston Hughes and a whole bunch of other people from America on a tour. And what Langston Hughes, among many things in which he found that prostitution was practically eradicated in the USSR. Prostitution was gone. Why? According to Langston Hughes, is because the women didn't need to do it because the resources were made available and they were taken care of, and they all was getting educated. They was all laboring and learning, engineering and everything else. Everything was freely open to them. So therefore, there was no need for them to exploit themselves. I just want to bring that point out to show you in real time how it looks. So you will find that in God willing, I get a copy and give it to people, Most High willing. But this is, I make reference to these other revolutions to show you how it look in real time. The stuff that we're talking about and we're reading about isn't just some kind of idealist dream of utopia. This stuff has happened, and the Most High have had it played out in the real world. It's just the capitalists have kept this information from us. And that's one of the reasons why we're bringing this stuff to the table. So if you can bear with me reading Lenin and Marx and everybody else, I believe that we all can benefit from it. All right. Now, back to the manifesto here. It says, the communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationality. Yes, I have read that as well. But Marx's reply is the working man have no country, right? People say, well, if they introduce communists here, then they take away, our nation. These poor people, us as poor people, don't have a stake in nothing here. That's why it's hard for me to realize how can they even go to war? I just couldn't be a patriot. If you don't arrest me because I don't want to go, if you were able to get me on a plane and get me over there somewhere anyway, I'm not coming back. For a couple of reasons, I'm not getting back on a plane. And two is I don't think I want to go back to this place. And you know what happened to the soldiers who came back to this place, the World War I, World War II, lynching them, everything else, in uniform. And to this very day, if you just do research to see how many veterans are homeless, isn't that something? Homeless, they wouldn't fall for the country because it's not their country. And that's what Marx is arguing. The rich are trying to say that the communists trying to take the man's country. The country's been taken, the land's been taken, the resources been taken, and we have to come to this awareness. And the kingdom of God and what the Bible's bringing to the table is, this is what has happened to the nations of the world, and this is the call of Abraham and his children to reverse this monstrosity that have prevailed in this earth. So Marx argues, he continues, as he says, the working man have no country. We cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to be the leading class of the nation, he must constitute itself the nation. In other words, the poor people got to come together and make a new nation by removing the bourgeoisie, coming to political supremacy. It is so far itself national, though not in the bourgeois sense of the word. National differences and antagonism between peoples are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. So what are the conditions of life that's happening or being gendered in this world from the capitalist freedom of commerce in the world market? What is the condition of life? More poverty, more exploitation, more people being removed off the land. So what Marx is saying, because of this global spread of oppression and suppression, the people now, this divide of the nations is vanishing, because people are starting to learn what they have in common. Okay, this was going on in his day. This was going on through early 1900s all the way up to the 60s. And that's when they started, Edward Bernays used that television and used the newspaper to distract people. because it was a colonial mattress was being broken throughout Africa and Asia. And why the freedom struggle was raging throughout the world and the capitalists was losing ground, what did the people in America and in the developed countries, what were they doing? Listening to Michael Jackson, looking at the ball games. You go back and you look what the television did. It distracted everyone. Everybody was partying. Drugs hit the street, television, everything else. It distracted people with entertainment while the liberation struggle was happening throughout the world. I remember those days. And when I go back and I look at a Maurice Bishop who was killed in 1983, a Thomas Sankara who was killed in 1987, what were these men doing? They were breaking the grip of colonial capitalist rule. And they literally changed their country in a matter of 4 years. I'm talking about they seen dramatic changes. Unemployment dropped, people being fed, and America moved in. France moved in on Thomas Sankara, wiped him out. America moved in on Maurice Bishop down in Grenada. Reagan moved in on him and set something up to get him out. What does this teach me? That what these men are bringing to the table, this is truly, I believe, what the Bible is bringing to the table. Because this is the only thing that riles up the ruling class. See, they don't care you sit up here and argue about religion. You sit up here, you talk about this, just like the Messiah said, they're going to persecute you. They're going to persecute you. And they're going to try to kill you, and they're going to deliver you up. And they've been proving it. Say a good read is 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television by Jerry Mander. All right, I'm glad you posted that. That sounds like a good one. You about to get me buying some more books, man. I've been trying to take a break. But see, it's an addiction. I told the guy at work today, it's an addiction. That Amazon, boy, that's one of the worst things you can have. 24-hour service all night. And free delivery. And a Prime color. Free delivery. Prime, well, I tell you, 2 days. Just click of a button. Just a couple of clicks. Sometimes I got to click the button and walk away. I'm thinking, man.
Order now, it'll be there.
I know, right? Order now. You guys, they give you the countdown. And I'm sitting up there going back and forth. Oh. But that sounds like a good one. 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television. All right, so now notice what he's bringing to the table. The nations of the people are being drawn together because of the development of the bourgeoisie or the capitalist mode of production. Now, he said, because of the commerce of the capitalists, they are doing away with the divide of the people. The people are starting to see that, they have things in common, number one. Number two is they're also drawing the people together on the other end as far as the global market, right? So now we talk about Amazon, who we have on Amazon. When we call Amazon, we have somebody from Bangladesh, so you bring in a global market, you're bringing the people together as well. So you have it working on 2 ends. And I just want to show you what we mean by this. Let's go to Revelation chapter 17. Daily more and more was vanishing and yielding to the freedom of commerce, to the world market, to the uniformity of the mode of production, and in its conditions of life corresponding thereto. So now what Marx is arguing, now this is written back in the late, or should I say the mid-1800s. And he was back then talking about a global market. Now again, if we go back to Revelation chapter 18, and we start to look at this, analyze the text, looking at this text according to the concrete material world around it and what brings it about. All right, that is very important. What brings this about? So Revelation 17, number 1. Revelation 17 and verse 1, it says, he starts off, and there came one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. The judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. Notice this. with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, speaking of the rulers of the earth, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So the ruling class and the inhabitants or their citizens have been made drunk. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with the whore, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk. You see what he's saying? The inhabitants of the what? Earth. Earth. And what did he notice? That the great whore sat upon many waters, right? So let's go down to verse 15. Revelation chapter 17, verse 15. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Just like the Communist Manifesto, just like Marx and Engels begin to observe, the nations are being drawn together one way or the other. They're being drawn together by what? Freedom of commerce and the world market. Notice what it said in the manifesto? To the uniformity in the mode of production and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. So they're being drawn together to commit fornication with this whore. This is the uniformity in the mode of production. Speaking of the way that they do business, the way that they conduct their markets, it's spawning up in China, Japan, Africa, right? So that mode of production and the conditions of life corresponding thereto. So you're going to have people who's going to be coming together to commit fornication with the whore and to be made drunk by the whore. But you will also have those on the other end. They're going to be drawn together, and the poor is going to realize that they're in the same position and that they're going to learn is they need to do something about this. And remember, because people say, well, brother, God going to do that. All right, well, we got other teachings on it, but I just give you little glimpses of where we go with this. God operates through his instruments, which are people. Okay. Now, if you will, turn right over to chapter 18. So we see the whore is sitting upon this global market. Now, what exactly is the whore anyway? The whore itself is none other than, verse 18 tells us, the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Well, what is a city? See, this is the key. People don't really realize what a city is. And I didn't bring my Macmillan dictionary today, but a city is a place where a community of people come together to conduct commerce and form industry. So a city, we may picture a city just being like a Los Angeles or a Dallas. But Buffalo is a city too, for example. But it's not as big, right? So really, what made the city of Buffalo? What made the city of Dallas? Commerce. And like you know that if commerce die in Dallas, then Dallas die, right? Then the city die. So what we're looking at is a global city. See, he's saying the great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Revelation 17 and 18 is letting us know off the bat that it is a global city. That's all it is. And it is this city that reigns over the kings of the earth. The kings of the earth serve the city. Why? Revelation 18 takes us right into this, to answering this question. So I argue, according to the dictionary, that a city is a place where people come together to do industry and commerce. Revelation 18, it starts off in verse 1. It says, after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lighted with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Verse 3, to see, we're going to confirm what we read thus far in the Communist Manifesto. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. You see how he's drawn us back into a global network. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. You see you see how he just brought us into this, what made this city? Commerce. So the ruling class and the merchants are the next keys to understanding the clue of this city. Now he's bringing in the merchants, and he says the merchants of the earth and the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the merchants are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And if we continue reading in Revelation 18, he's going to run down the delicacies, right? Gold, silver, brass, timber. He's going to run down all of these natural resources: silk, scarlet, thyme, ivory, marble. He's going to run down all of these resources. But if we don't really realize it, as they would say, looking at this and interpreting this using the method of what they will argue dialectical materialism, we probably won't really grasp what's being brought here. Like, they brought ivory to the market. How do you bring ivory to the market? You got to exploit workers, right? Or men to go hunt what? Elephants? You got to murder elephants and rhinoceros, right? So what we got to do is look at that material environment. What brought this to the table? That's how we will recognize the evil of Babylon. And is this merchandise, or he's calling it the abundance of her delicacies. Well, Karl Marx called it commodities. That's what Marx calls it, commodities. And it's from this abundance and the riches of the commodities that have caused all nations to drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And I'm going to give you one more example before we move forward. Go to Isaiah, the 23rd chapter, so we can understand how this is written. We're going to look at another whore. And we could start to understand where the Apostle John is drawing his language from. Okay? We read the book of Revelation, people try to interpret it without reading the prophets. You got to read the prophets to understand his language. So where did this idea of this whore, where did all this come from anyway? The prophets. So we go back to Isaiah, the 23rd chapter. We're going to take our journey back into another global city. And this global city is, guess who? Guess who this is? Tyrus. So we're going to read verses 1 through 3, and then we're going to skip. Now, I want you to follow me along with this one. Because again, we're following up with the manifesto as it argues this. Isaiah 23. Because remember, Marx said national differences and antagonism between people are daily more and more vanishing. In other words, they're being drawn into one global network. Notice, Marx says, him and Engels argues, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce. That's what we read about in Revelation 18. To the world market. That's what we read about in Revelation 18. The world market. To the uniformity in the mode of production. That is the nations committing fornication with her. And the conditions of life corresponding thereto. They're going to pattern themselves after Great Babylon, right? But notice, Tyrus. Let's understand what this means, this whoredom and fornication. So Isaiah 23, verse 1 reads, it says, the burden of Tyre, howl ye ships of Tarshish, for it is laid waste, so that there is no house, no entering in from the land of Kittim. It is revealed to them. But still, ye inhabitants of the isles, thou whom the merchants of Zidon that pass over the sea have replenished. We're going back into the ancient world market. Here, it wasn't dominated by Babylon. It was dominated by Tyre. But Tyre actually got its pattern from ancient Babylon, Nimrod and his companions. So, but we're observing another world market. And why is it happening upon the waters? Because that's the swiftest way to deal with trade. That's why the great cities are upon waterways. Look around, look on your map of America. Look, all of the great cities are on the banks or the shores of some water. All right, and they build out from there. So what we have here is easier to ship commodities and trade. So now he's arguing about the inhabitants of Tyre and Zidon. Verse 3, and by great waters, the seed of Sihor, the harvest of the river, is her what? Revenue. And she is a what? Mart of the nations. You know, see what she's saying? This is the commercial city. But this is in Babylon the Great that John talking about. You see what we're saying? This is the common language of the book. This was Tyrus when it ruled the world. And when you read about Tyrus, you can understand, and all of this fits in with the prophets. You know, when they couldn't wait for the Sabbath day to be gone and all that. You read in Amos? You know why they couldn't wait for the Sabbath day to be gone? So they could set forth wheat. You know where they was taking the wheat? Right here to the market that was being pushed by Zidon and Tyre. The mart of the nations, all right? Now, let's skip down a little bit, verse 15. Tyre was to be destroyed by a new world power, which was Babylon it was Neo-Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, all right? But I want to skip down and show you what was to happen, verse 15, because we talking about this fornication, right? And you try to say, man, well, how in the world is fornication, what that got to do with commerce? All right, we see commerce and fornication in the book of Revelation. Now, for us to understand this language, we're going back to the prophets. We see that this is the mart of the nations, and they are the merchants of Zidon have replenished the people over the seas. Verse 15 reads, and it shall come to pass in that day that Tyre shall be forgotten 70 years, according to the days of one king. After the end of 70 years shall Tyre do what? Sing as an harlot. Well, how this look? Tyre, the global nation, would be subdued for 70 years. Then she shall come back and sing like a harlot. Take and harp. That's what you're going to do. You're going to sing, right? You're about to take up your harp. Take and harp, go about the city, thou harlot, that has been forgotten. Make sweet melody. Sing many songs that thou mayest be remembered. And it shall come to pass after the end of 70 years that the Lord will visit Tyre, and she shall turn to her hire as an whore, right? And shall commit fornication with what? All the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. Well, how is she doing that? Trade and commerce. Well, why you say that, Brother Judah? Notice verse 18. For her merchandise and her hire shall be holiness unto the Lord. Notice how it's going to be holiness, though. It shall not be treasured nor laid up. For her merchandise shall be for them that dwell before the Lord, to eat sufficiently and for durable clothing. Now, anybody realize what we just finished reading here, these last couple of verses? How was Tyre committing whoredom? Going into trade. She was subdued. Now the nation of Tyre is going back into trading a global network, going back into global commerce. The market is starting again for Tyre. And now she's going to commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world. She's going to begin her trade like she did previously. So trade and commerce, they're tied in. Mute your mic for me, brother. There you go. But notice what made her merchandise holy. You see what made her merchandise holy? It could not be stored or treasured or laid up. Now, what do you call wealth that is stored or treasured or laid up? Capital. Could it be? We're talking about capital and wealth treasured or laid up. Where would it be laid up at? In the hands or in the vaults or in the citadels of who? The rich. But this merchandise accumulated by the rich shall be made holy. Well, what made it holy? It was distributed for the people, to the people. Y'all notice that? For her merchandise now shall be for them that dwell before Jehovah. To what? Eat sufficiently and for durable clothing. So all of the wealth accumulated by this trade will be used to feed the people. That's why I'm saying in order for the rich to make reconciliation, to make an atonement, they got to redistribute the wealth. There isn't any atonement being made for this country or no rich person unless they redistribute the wealth. The Bible just teach that all over. Rich man and Lazarus, rich man with the barns. Here in Isaiah, this is what made that merchandise holy. It had to be given to the people for sustainability. But we realize the whoredom was, or I'm trying to bring to the table, the whoredom was the global network committed by Tyrus, and the whoredom is the global network of commerce and trade committed by the latter Babylonian system. And John's day, which was Rome, and where we are living at today is the vestiges of the Roman Empire. And classes 1, I believe 1 through 3 or 1 through 4, we talk about how the Americas grew out of the Roman Empire. And that's where we come up with these two beasts in Revelation chapter 13. Now, let's go back to the manifesto. We get ready to open up shortly. And we got one more week in part 2, so let's get through this part. Now, he also says something about the proletariat must get political power or political supremacy. Other class, we have brought this to the table and showed you this is what the Bible teach, period, right? We read that last week and a few other weeks. And God willing, we will read it again in the future, but Daniel and all of the prophets are telling us the same thing. Now, back in the manifesto, it reads, we're at the middle on page 25, the supremacy of the proletariat. I don't know what number that is, the supremacy of the proletariat. 55, thank you. So section 55, the supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of the leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the first conditions of the emancipation of the proletariat. So the proletariat must gain supremacy. You say, Brother Judah, well, how can you say something like that? Is that true? We got to wait for the Lord to do it. The next part reads, in proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another will also be put to an end or put an end to, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put an end to. In proportion as the antagonism between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. Do y'all see what he's saying was going to bring it to an end? The supremacy of the proletariat. See, once the ruling class are removed, then Marx is arguing that everything else shall follow. The exploitation of one individual by another shall end. The exploitation of one nation by another shall end. All right, the antagonism between classes shall vanish. Why? Because classes itself shall vanish. And the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. Why? Because there shall be an abolition of, what he's saying, there shall be an abolition of war. So if you will, go to Psalms 10. And I believe we're going to read to, what number is undoubtedly, it will be said.
That's 62.
62, okay. So I got about 20 minutes before we open it up. Let's see how close we can get to that. Psalms 10, starting at verse 17. Psalms 10, notice this. Psalms chapter 10, bear with me a little bit. In verse 17, Notice what it says. Jehovah, or Lord, thou hast heard the desire of the humble. Thou wilt prepare their heart. Thou wilt cause thine ear to hear, to judge the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may no more oppress. So what the psalmist is praying about here is exactly what Karl Marx is arguing as well. Exploitation of one individual by another will be put to an end. Exploitation by one nation by another shall be put to an end. The hostility between classes will vanish. The hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. Now, Psalms 10, I have read verse 17 and 18, my brother. So let's look at one more text to complement this. So he's saying, he's praying that you shall judge or bring equity or justice to the fatherless and to the oppressed, that the man of the earth may no more oppress. Do you see how that's worded? The judgment he shall bring to the fatherless and the oppressed. In turn, this judgment will create a social condition that the man of the earth may no more oppress. If you see how that's worded. So there's a lot here. Yes, 17 and 18 in Psalms chapter 10. And this is what I mean when we look into the Bible, get into the intricacies. How do this happen? What is this judgment to relieve the oppressed and also creating a condition where the man of the earth may no more oppress? And now let's go to Micah. Again, we had read Micah last week. Our focus on Micah last week, though, was showing how the resources of society will be available. Every man under his vine, right? But this time I want to concentrate on something else, because a manifesto, according to the doctrine of the representative, I would say, of the nations, because this Communist Manifesto was a manifesto that the people in Europe was reading all over the place. So I'm reading the manifesto in so many words, like I said before, is for us to get an idea on what the nations want. Because remember, a blessing to the nations, right? A blessing to the nations. So for us to understand what do the nations want, what would be a blessing? As I read the comments, everybody got to mute their mics. You got to make sure that your mic is muted. As I read what the nations want, and Karl Marx spoke for many people throughout Europe and Africa and Asia, this taking us right back to the cry of Abraham, why he was called. All right, I want you to remember that. So as he's arguing here, class antagonism will come to an end. People exploit one another shall come to an end, or as the Psalms put it plainly, that the man of the earth may no more oppress. Now, Micah, right, is a prophet. And notice I just finished talking about Abraham. Abraham's children are supposed to bring this, right? All right. Now, so let's read this carefully in Micah chapter 4. It reads, verse 1, but in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of Jehovah or the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. In contrast to the global Babylonian market of commerce. That's what occupied the people at one time. Now there's something else happening in the social construct of the globe. People are going up to the mountain of the Lord of hosts. Well, how they know it's his mountain? They gonna see somebody glowing and sitting in the chair? I need you all to be with me on this. How they gonna know this is his mountain? Where they going? Who they going to see? Verse 2, and many nations. So we're talking about a global shift. A global shift from the nations committing fornication with the whore. We see this global shift of now many nations shall come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, and to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from where? Jerusalem. So we got Zion and Jerusalem. We're identifying Zion and Jerusalem. Who live in Zion and Jerusalem? Could it be Abraham's children? Do Abraham's children live in Zion and Jerusalem? Yes, Abraham's children. What is Abraham's children? What are they to do? Everybody know that Genesis 18:18 by heart? Genesis 18, I'm going to read it for you so you can understand and put this in context. They identified the mountain of the Lord. It is settled within Zion and Jerusalem, putting us in the heart of Abraham's children. Okay? And if we go to Genesis 18, this was important because the nations are going up to learn of his ways. Now notice Genesis 18, because by the time people get to Micah, they forget all about what they read in Genesis 18. But we can't forget. And if you don't know what to pay attention to, only thing you think about is Genesis when Abraham had a couple of wives. You don't know nothing else about Abraham. But that wasn't the important part. This is the important part. Genesis 18, starting at verse 18, because he repeated it several times throughout Abraham's life. It reads, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation. Is that what we're reading about in Micah? The mountain of the Lord in Zion and in Jerusalem. Seeing that Abraham's children shall become a great and mighty nation. And notice this, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. Who's coming up to Jerusalem? And Micah said, and many nations shall go up, right? Because some going to be rebuked and perish. So we see the nations going up. Genesis 18:18 again, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him. Now we're getting a material identity of who these nations going to see. You remember asking, well, who they going to see? A glowing figure? No, not necessarily. We're learning now who they're going to see. Because God will be glorified through these people. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord. What did Micah say? The nations went up and said, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord mountain of the Lord, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. Micah 4:2. You see what you're reading here in Genesis 18? Abraham's children shall keep the way. The nations are going up to Zion to learn the ways of God. They shall keep the way of the Lord. And what is that way? To do what? Justice and what? Judgment. What did the psalmist say? Now we're learning how that's going to happen. Remember the psalmist say, judge the poor and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may no more oppress. You see how this is starting to work out? We have Abraham's children. It was Abraham's child who even sung that song. Now we have Abraham's children who the nation's going up to in Micah chapter 4. Why? Because they are the administrators of justice and judgment. And the Lord, you see why it's necessary that Abraham's children got to do judgment and justice? Because it can't happen unless they do it. You see how this is worded? That the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him. There is a condition. Abraham's children must do justice and judgment in order that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him. And what did he speak? The nations of the earth shall be blessed in Abraham. Y'all see where we're going with this? How are they blessed? Who do the people see? Abraham's children, right? That's what they see. What are they doing? administering justice and judgment in the earth. Now the nations who want to do justice and judgment are yielding to this divine principle of Israel, and that is justice. Now God will be realized. That's how you're going to see him. When this nation is doing justice and judgment. This is not far-fetched for me to argue this. When the people ask, when the disciples ask Yeshua or Yehoshua, show us the Father, what Yehoshua say? How long y'all been with me? Y'all ain't seen him. I done showed him to you. And they wonder, like, what in the world when they show us the Father? He said, when you see me. When you see what I have done, that's how God is realized. He's not like the Greeks. You're going to look up here and see somebody laying on a cloud. If he want to manifest himself that way, he can. He can do whatever he want to do. Only thing I'm doing is just read and show you what he said, this description on how he will be realized. So, let's go back to Micah 4. So in order for Abraham's blessing to come to pass, to be a blessing to the nations, Abraham's children got to do justice and judgment. So it's no coincidence that in Micah 4, it's taking us right to Jerusalem and Zion, where Abraham's children headquarters are. Right? And then we're reading, and he shall rebuke, or he shall judge among many people, Micah chapter 4, verse 3, and rebuke strong nations afar off, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares. So now, just as the psalmist prayed for, to bring judgment to the fatherless and to the oppressed. He shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. According to Karl Marx and everyone throughout Europe through the past century who've been reading the Communist Manifesto, they all want this. How do I know it? Because we just read it back in the Communist Manifesto, right? In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another will also be put to an end, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put an end to. In proportion as the antagonism between classes shall vanish. All antagonism between human beings. He said the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. You see, this is the same thing the prophet's saying. Why you think they're going to take their weapons of war and turn them into pruning hooks and plowshares? Because the antagonism between nation against nation is coming to an end. Karl Marx's argument comes to an end by abolishing the bourgeoisie. The Bible teaches us the same thing, but they don't call them the bourgeoisie. The Bible uses various words: the wicked, the kings of the earth, merchants. It used various words. Same thing. They just don't use the bourgeoisie, right? Merchants, right? So now, as we continue the Communist Manifesto, we're starting at this part here, the charges against communism. The charges against communism made from a religious and philosophical and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination. I mean, that's what I'm saying. You got to think about this. That's why when we use communism or the hammer or the sickle, anybody that got anything bad to say about communism, I know they're just not learned it. And I'm not yielding to that. So in other words, the idea is to provoke the thought. Yes, I have a hammer and sickle. Yes. Is it bad? Am I wrong by associating it with the Bible? Yes, brother Jew, you're wrong. Okay, now prove it. Bring it down on the table. Let's prove it. And that's when you get most of them walk away, if not all, because they can't prove it. And you go anywhere you want to go. Don't tell me about what a man did. Like I told you, listen, well, you know what Stalin did. You don't know Stalin. You don't know what Stalin did. You wasn't Russia. You wasn't in Russia, but I'm going to tell you who was in Russia when Stalin was ruling. Paul Robeson, W.E.B. Du Bois, and as I mentioned them earlier, Langston Hughes. W.E.B. Du Bois went on a 6-month tour throughout Russia and China and concluded that communism is the way that will bring liberation to the oppressed peoples of the world. And before Du Bois died and he moved to Ghana to aid Kwame Nkrumah in bringing communism to Africa, he said communism will prevail in the end. Those are prophetic words. That's what the Bible teaches. You know what we call that though? New Jerusalem. And people argue with me, what you talking about? No, it's not a cube coming out the sky. New Jerusalem is a perfect squared city of judgment and justice, a classless society. And just, they are right. These men are right. And so therefore they could sit up here and argue about communism. They could walk away if they want to. They can't bring anyone to the table. And Du Bois and the rest of them brought to the table that Russia was thriving. And I had to recant in my ignorance some of the things I said about Joseph Stalin. I didn't know much about Stalin, and I was running my mouth not knowing much about him. I knew a little bit more about Lenin. And they don't have much at all to say about Lenin. But anyhow, like I told you before, just because a person calls himself a Christian, I don't make him a Christian, right? Just because the Roman Catholic Church and their priests and all of the pedophiles and all of the Catholic priests, they all call themselves Christians, didn't they? But were they Christians? So therefore, you could say, well, Christianity molested children. Did Christianity really molest children? Did real Christians molest children? No. Those men molested children. They wasn't Christians. And it's the same thing with communism. So what we're doing, we're provoking communism for people to learn about it. Learn a new idea and free yourself from the capitalist ideologies in which all of our ideas and how we conceive things and our perception of things are all formed by the capitalist society. We're saying, now you got to free yourself from that. Free yourself from it. And if you're not willing to free yourself from it, then we don't really want you part of this school because that's counterproductive. We need minds and thinkers. All right, now how we all learn? That's why I need to be around intelligent minds. I know I need help. So I need to be around some people, intelligent people. And I believe that the Most High have brought these people to the table. And I need you all to learn, to help us all learn together. So now we got to be free. Free. Now we understand communism isn't a bad word. We're understanding that everything that they accuse the communists of, this is exactly what the hypocritical bourgeoisie or the capitalists do in their society. Black people dehumanize other black people, scholars or not. That's true. That's true. What these teaching? Now we can understand why there will be only a few. Yeah, isn't that something? It is frightening though, brother McLemore. It is frightening because I come to the same conclusion when I begin to learn this. This is hard for people to accept because it's just different. You know what I'm saying? And that's why normally, people even been online and stuff like that. I give them a heads up. This isn't the regular Israelite place. And I don't want to get you caught off guard. So look at some of the videos. This is different. We know it's different. But when we learn it, to complement what this brother posted, he's saying that when you're looking at it this way, you can start to see why it's few that will find that path. Because in the world of religion, many people don't, it's just not a conversation piece. So let's continue to present our case. We're almost out of here for the day. I got about 10 minutes and then we'll be opening up. So we've seen that this vanishing of the one nation against another, the vanishing of the classes, the vanishing of exploitation of one individual by another. And that includes, remember, don't lose sight of all what this entails because we begin when he was talking about how the women are used as just simply instruments of production. So when we read this here, in proportion of exploitation by one individual by another, he means not just men against men, but men against women and vice versa. This is a whole new idea that we have to get in our minds. This is a new way of thinking. We have to break the shackles, like Paul said, renew the mind. Now we have to learn women's role. Women got to learn men's role. And we are to work together, right? That's why the woman wasn't made out of the dust like everything else. She actually comes from the rib of man. And there's some symbolism behind that that's important. What does a rib cage do? It supports and it's a protection, isn't it? It's a protection for vital organs. And she was taken from the rib. And you know, it says she shall be a helpmeet. You know, the Hebrew, I believe, is, oh my goodness, I can't remember the Hebrew word for it, Ezer. This is the same Hebrew word that is used when it reads that Yahweh will help Israel. Same Hebrew word. To help mankind in a way in which he can't help himself. The idea behind her being a helpmeet under the capitalist mode of production, we just think, well, you know what? She's just like an apprentice or someone could, I can do it anyway, but you know what? Just have her help me, you know. You can help. That's the way it's taught in this world. But the Hebrew idea of the city of justice is no. She comes from the rib, signifying the side. She's coming out of a man out of mankind, not out of the dust, but she's showing this correlation with the human being, this oneness yet, because they all, how the Most High say that twain shall be one, is showing this relatedness between man. She's coming from his rib, which the rib is a source of protection, and she's coming from his side, not from behind him, nor in front of him. So we're not talking about who's superior. We're talking side by side companions to rule and have dominion over the earth, period. And she is the part that plays a help. And you look it up on your own, that Hebrew word help, and you will find out, no, this is a help like a man needs a help. He needs his help or he won't make it. That's that kind of help. And God knows I could testify that myself. Shoot, I was messed up. I didn't, but those are the lessons. Those are the thoughts. I'm gonna get me off to something else. But I'm telling you, just look it up. We gotta. So now, when we begin to leave the ideals and the ideas that the capitalists have put in our minds, we have to now look at a new road of liberation. When we look at this new path of liberation, the woman don't have time, whether she wants to or not. She's gonna have to be pushed into her role. That's what we are demanding in this new world. She got to take it. And I know when she get there, she'll approve of it, but she's not used to it. You know what I'm saying? Like cat coming out of darkness. Oh, turn that light back off. No, you get to move it. Some slaves didn't even want to be free. They thought they wanted to be free, and they followed Harriet Tubman into the woods, and they realized they don't want to be free. Harriet Tubman said, you ain't got no choice now. Either you coming with us or you about to lay down right here. And you won't be getting up when I finish with you. She put that shotgun right in their face. You ain't going back. That's right. That's right. We don't know what you're going to do. So you either going to move forward or perish right before us. Because she forced them. And she said herself, she could have freed 1,000 more slaves if they would have just known that they were slaves. So now we got to break the shackles of the positions of where our women stand. And man got to find out how in the world we can't be free unless the women free. But no, we'll learn this. So this is what Marx is arguing. Again, I took that route to show the breaking of this exploitation as women being used as instruments of production. This is tying into not exploiting one another, no individual exploiting one another, no nation exploiting one another. Okay, this is what we're talking about. All right. So now, I got about 5 minutes. The next thing he's bringing to the table, the charges against the communists made from the religious or philosophical, and generally from the ideological standpoint, he said, are not deserving of serious examination. He says, does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conception, in one word, man's consciousness or his awareness, changes with every change in the conditions of his material existence? Now, this is what I was talking about. This is what is leading us to. In his social relations and in his social life. He said the material world around you, it informs your views and your ideas and your conceptions, your awareness and your consciousness. That's why we said we got to come to a higher awareness, because the consciousness of and the awareness of the capitalist societies have thrust people into darkness. And he's saying we have to come to a new awareness. And how does this happen? We're affected by the changes of every in our conditions of the material existence of the world, right? Well, if you don't have that change right now, in other words, we got to find out where that change took place. That's why I go through other societies, to show you what was happening. All right. So he's coming to this conclusion. What else does the history of ideas prove than that intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production is changed? All right. So your mind changes as your material environment changes. The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. So the ideas we're taught in school, the ideas we're taught all around us, they are the ruling class ideas. The way we look at one another, the way we look at women, the way we look at our families, they're all a part of the ruling class ideas. He continues, when people speak of the ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express the fact that within the old society, the elements of a new one have been created, and that the disillusion of the old ideas keep even pace with the disillusion of the old conditions of existence. So the ideas revolutionize society. As old ideas fade out, the old conditions of existence fade out. So as capitalism fades, then the ideas of capitalism fades. When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed in the 18th century to rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the revolutionary bourgeoisie. He's showing all of the changes in societies brought forth a change in ideas. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom, of conscience, merely gave expression to the sway of free competition within the domain of knowledge. Now we're going to close out with this part. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to the sway of the free competition within the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development. But religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survive this change. I don't want to get into this until next week. We're going to finish out with this for next week. And this is where we're going to get more into the ideas and how we must change over to a new way of thinking, a new awareness, all right? So we're going to open it up for discussion, we will begin next week at undoubtedly. It will be said, religious, moral, and philosophical, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of the historical development. So, if you will, we can open it up, and I want to see if anyone have any feedback, any questions about some of the stuff we read today. Brother Zamila, new awareness comes through education and dedication. I can't express that enough. Dedication is the key. Education and dedication, you definitely need both. So let me see if I missed anything. You can open it up. Those who want to say something, you can unmute your mic.
Brother Jude, I wanted to say real quick.
Yes, sir.
Growing up, it was like with communism, right?
Yes.
Growing up, it was just like a taboo word, right?
Yes.
It's like when you say communism, people be like, "Oh, that's what crazy nations do," right? You know, nations that that's not like the thing to do,
Right.
right?
Right.
Anybody who does that, like, you wouldn't want to live in a country like that.
Right.
That's just kind of the whole, aura
It is.
of what communism has been made out to be here in America, at least, right? But I feel like,
And Europe, Western Europe.
right? Well, yeah.
But I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
People like they could never explain that to you. You know what I'm saying? Like why? Like you said, they can't go into detail. Why is communism bad?
Right.
Right? It's just something that's been programmed.
Right.
So it's interesting. When you kind of look at it from that point of view. Go a little bit deeper.
Yes.
Learn a little bit more about it.
That's right.
Nothing is like really. It's communism. If you got bad people using communism, then it's gonna have negative effects, right? So let's say the rulers, you got evil rulers who are using communism in a negative way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then it's obviously it's gonna be bad, right? There's gonna be bad effects from that,
I understand.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
You get what I'm saying? But I feel like maybe that's been used as communism as a whole is just bad.
That's what they have.
Right. They
yes.
use those examples and then say all the communism is bad.
Right.
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 Instead of looking at the bigger picture. Right.
Right. And when you look at the bigger picture, you realize this is a little advocate. You can't use communism in a wrong way. You can't use communism in the wrong way. The day you do the wrong thing is the day that you stop doing communism. So when you have the ruling class who call themselves communists, and yet they're exploiting their people, they're no longer participating or practicing communism. So you can't use it the wrong. Not just want just for.
I see what you're saying.
For the argument,
so
yes.
You've left communism.
You have left it immediately the day that you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because by virtue of what it is.
By virtue of what it is, it's an action in a sense.
Right.
Yes.
So really, it's just a misunderstanding of what it is.
That's exactly what it is. A misunderstanding.
It's a deliberate way that they have hoodwinked us, I guess, in a way, to make us think that it's actually bad and it's actually wrong.
Yep.
When you think about, because the way that I grew up thinking about it, just from what I heard about it, it takes away your freedoms.
Exactly.
Now, I know that
exactly.
There were a lot of people in the 80s and stuff that actually moved to before 89, they moved to the USSR.
Uh-huh.
There were Americans who actually moved there.
Yes.
Excuse me, you can't hear them.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll turn it this way.
Oh,
She was saying that first the young brother was saying that we have been taught communism was bad. And then we have a sister here just following up how we was taught that communism takes away our freedom. And she was mentioning that she knew of people.
Yeah, I read about people.
Yeah,
that
I have to.
moved
Yeah,
their families.
They moved their families.
They moved to the USSR
Yes.
before it all,
before it collapsed. Yes.
Yeah, before it collapsed.
Yes.
But it's interesting because when you look at it this way, communism doesn't really take away your freedoms. It actually gives you
It
freedom.
gives
It
you
actually
freedom.
frees you.
Yes.
But they did that so that we would fight against communism.
Absolutely.
So that we would not want that, so they could keep us enslaved.
So they can keep us enslaved. That's it in a nutshell. And that's what they got going on to this very day, And that's why when it says like education, and this is education and dedication is a good, it's two good qualities. But two bad qualities is ignorance and arrogance. Those are the two that send you right to hell. Because you're ignorant and you're too arrogant to learn anything else. And because of those conditions, why people to this day, they think communism, they don't know a lick about it. I mean, just have no clue. Never read it. I mean, nothing, not even a rudimentary understanding. I'm talking about people who I've experienced, like on a job. I've been a part of a union for such and such amount of years, probably almost 20 years. And I would agitate while I was learning this stuff on the job sites. And when I began to learn this stuff about Marx and them, I understood that, it was the communists who really came here and really pushed unions. And so on the job, I would hear a union person say or speak against communism. When they hear me saying something about it, I said, well, why are you a part of the union? The unions did that. The unions made it so you have a day off. Look at, we all top out at a common wage. We all get the same wage. All journeymen, we all get the same wage once you graduate from an apprentice. You have this common wage. Who you think started that? And someone gets so upset at that. But I would get aggravated too because of their ignorance, and they were so arrogant. Like, the reason why you able to get a day off, the reason why you're getting this wage as a journeyman, this is, you know, the communists was in this struggle. But even more so what was hidden is that and that's why I'm saying understanding timelines are important. Like you said before, 89, because Ronald Reagan made moves to tear it down by 1990, 1991. But if you follow the pattern from the revolution of 1917, Lenin died in the 20s, Stalin took over. So like in the 30s and the 40s, you had, especially in the 40s, you had Lenin reaching out to Negroes, or Russia, USSR, reaching out to so-called Negroes in the South. A lot of people from Alabama, I learned, in particular, was traveling to USSR learning in the schools of Lenin, which I had no clue that I didn't even think black people was in Russia. You asked me 20 years ago, I ain't even know black people in Russia. But they were there learning. And if you follow the timeline, when America began to make concessions and give people the days off, to give people higher pay, to give people more of the piece of the American pie, the cloud standing over America that made them make these concessions was Russia. A lot of people don't realize that, because Russia was 80, they had a station in Cuba, and one by one the colonial powers, Asia, from Vietnam to China, meaning from Mao to Ho Chi Minh, and I mentioned Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara. All of these men were bringing socialism and the ideas of the USSR to the table, all the way up into the 80s. America, when they began to do the project to help the poor, when they began to build housings, they did that because they knew they had to make concessions, because the labor workers was on edge, and the president had a meeting with the ruling class and said, listen, we better do something or they're gonna have a revolution in this place. This is the news that people don't know nothing about. Right. And they were afraid of a revolution. That's why they came down on the Panthers so hard, because the Panthers was unlike any other group, because they brought international news. They would bring the communist movement and introduce this to the people in the neighborhoods, the ghettos. They knew what was happening in Vietnam. They knew what was going on in the struggles in Africa, in China. And there was one of the greatest threats where J. Edgar Hoover came. They murdered the Panthers out. Like, they used the guns as an excuse, but it wasn't the guns. Huey wasn't no gun-toting people. That's not what he wanted to do. But it was the ideology of the Panthers, bringing communism. That's what made them a threat. That's why they gunned down Fred Hampton. That's why they did this. 21 years old, Fred Hampton began to organize. He began to bring the hillbillies and the Negroes together when they begin to realize they have a common enemy. They gunned 21 years old, they killed the boy. 21 years old. And they said the only thing he had on his bed was a book of linen. Didn't have no guns. But their problem is that they had guns in the house. That was the problem. All right, they didn't know how to handle it properly. But I'm arguing their ideology is what made them a threat. Now, all that being said is this. The concessions being made by the rich, it was only because they feared that they will lose ground here in America. Once, follow the timeline, once Ronald Reagan, who is the applauded hero of the capitalists, once he negotiated to bring down the walls of Berlin to bring an end to the USSR, you see the changes? Wages, the gap between rich and poor begin to grow. There isn't any now, any superpower that will stand on behalf of communism or stand on behalf of justice today. That's why the capitalists are going over the globe. They have gone mad. They have a global freedom because Russia was in their way. And they had Cuba down here, and they was organizing in South America. That's why they came down on Maurice Bishop, who was organizing and turned Grenada into a socialist society. And I'm saying socialism and communism, but we're going through these teachings to show you these men are bringing biblical principles to their nation. Okay? That's what they were bringing. And they were eradicating hunger. They were eradicating prostitution. They were nationalizing the land. And America came down on them like a ton of bricks. And now, since it's been moved out of the way, look at what's happening now. Donald Trump said he's going to make America great again. Everybody know what that means? He's going to bring the people back to pre-revolution days. Pre-revolution days is pre-1917. 15-hour work days, low pay, long work. Systematically, it's falling right, and it's happening. People bringing their work home. You don't know it, though. Your 40-hour week is easily turned to a 50, 60-hour week. Say it again.
They think they're being set free. Like they think that
They
he's doing
think.
this.
They think.
They think, oh, he's doing this wonderful thing for us, and he's really not.
Not at all.
The shackles right back on.
Putting the shackles right on us. Putting the shackles right on us. And tightening them. All right. And lower wages, everything. You see, even with the write-off for taxes, if you look at all of the things he's been doing, he's been strengthening the ruling class. To have now, you can't even bring up a complaint against your worker if you get injured on the job. Now it's harder for you to file lawsuits. Everything is working in behalf of the ruling class, just like it was pre-revolution. You couldn't bring up no lawsuit against Carnegie Steel if you got killed or injured. There wasn't none of that. So they're taking it away. And why they talking about who's Trump tweeting and who he cussing out, that's a distraction. Look at the policies and look how capitalism is growing. Now, all that being said, that's why I'm arguing, well, what do the saints do? What have we been taught to do by our ministers? Is there administration for housing happening? Do we look? We got to look into what Paul was doing, what John was doing. We have to look into see what these men were doing. All right. Now I went on another spiel, but if anybody wanted to add something to this, you can. But this is now drawing us into the ministry. We got to look and see if the Creator will be glorified. We cannot underestimate what He will use us for, but He can't use us if our ideas and our ideology is rooted with the wicked. We have to be free from that. We got to really know what justice is. If we don't know, we can't stand on His behalf, right? Anybody want to say? I heard somebody open up a mic.
Yes, I do. This is Brother RJ.
Shalom, Brother RJ.
Shalom, shalom. Yeah, so I do have a couple of points I just want to make. Earlier, I did make that post about television, about the 4 arguments against television by Jerry Mander. He also wrote a book called Capitalism, the Capitalism Papers, on the fatal flaw of capitalism. And he basically goes through and talks about how capitalism is destroying its own self because of its forever expanding greed, and how it has to pretty much just bulldoze everybody, pretty much to pour over to get what it needs. And it's just basically destroying itself. And another interesting thing in the book about the television, the 4 arguments for the elimination of television, he talks about, he calls his first chapter of the book called The Belly of the Beast. And it's about the unification of experience and also the replacement of experience through television, and how people don't even know it, but they pretty much regurgitate what they hear on TV. And that just goes back to how you guys were saying about people wouldn't really explain why they dislike communism. They just knew they didn't like it. But because of that media, the marketing and all, it just kind of shunned people away from it. And that's the one point I wanted to bring up on that. And another thing, if you go on YouTube, there is a YouTube page called New Economic Thinking, and it's a group of all these different doctors and all these economists and things, and they're talking about how to reshape capitalism for the 21st century, because they find that capitalism now, as it is, if it keeps going the way that it's going, in the next 10 to 15 years, it want to be able to sustain itself. So they're trying to come up with all these different ways to try to revamp it, calling it different names and all this stuff. And it's just very interesting to see how they talk about capitalism and how they want to change it and how they're trying to bring certain people in the fold. It's a very interesting channel. And my last thing I want to point out is that on my side time, it's like a little hobby. I'm interested in something called environmental psychology, and it's basically talking about how we relate to our surroundings and how those surroundings relate to us. And they did a study. This group of environmental psychologists did a study about the perception and cognition of the urban design and city design, and it basically says that our environment shapes our behaviors, which is, I mean, most people kind of already understand that, but it says that our environment shapes our behaviors, and they basically say that sometimes our environments are put there in a certain way to have us, to pretty much act a certain way. And if we was put in a, say, an opposite environment, for instance, like you have the city, then you'll have like the eco village where people kind of move out the city and they start their little hubs and they growing their food and trying to sustain themselves in a pretty much a communist type of way. And it talks about how people perceptions and cognitions change like with under a year, and people the health benefits and all these other things that go on. So just another form of capitalism. Is a cancer to the people in it. Even if you're not part of capitalism or you don't want to be a capitalist, but staying in the city, from the noise levels, from the pollution of the air, it's just a very deep study on how our cities and things are destroying us. And, we basically don't know it because we're so focused on trying to go to work and get money and all. But it's just when I read this and we study this, man, it just every day, every time, I'm being more open to how deep it is, man. And it's just again, it's gonna come a time where it's gonna hit the fan, and we have to be educated and willing and ready to do the work when it's time. So that's all. I just wanted to round it off my mind there. So thank you, people.
Thank you for that input. And God willing, we'll be dealing with more of that idea of the like the eco villages, which we're definitely not against that. Like I said, we went and got some land and stuff ourselves, but learning more now of this revolutionary theory, I will argue now, is that if you recall, even reading through the manifesto, how the capitalist continues to spread. So as people flee, well, look at it this way. I won't say flee, that's the wrong word. But if we look at early communities, this is what existed before capitalism. And what we have found, if we look at history, how capitalism have destroyed these cities or these villages or the countryside. Now, remember, Marx was arguing how the bourgeoisie, or those who were transforming into the bourgeoisie, he said that they wanted to go back and bring back the old ties that used to exist. But he said they had been revolutionized by the bourgeoisie. They've been destroyed and things have just simply been changed. And I see the same thing happening with those who want to just go live rurally. Now, am I against rural living? No, I'm not. But rural living alone, you're going to eventually, if not you, you will eventually be flushed out, or others. Meaning this, Engels argued that the experiment that was done by, he did a community, he was a rich man who came from Europe and built a community here. Oh my goodness. right on the tip of my tongue. But he was, oh my goodness, I can't remember this guy's name. But anyhow, he was among others like the Anima community, which we understand now as the Amish. Owens, Robert Owens. He set up a community. It was really big early in America. This was this movement of the visions of utopia because they wanted to respond that same way with capitalism when it was in its primitive stages. You understand what I'm saying? People seen that and they wanted to go and live off away from these cities. But what has happened? Capitalism has spread. So from from a time from when just 10% of the American population lived in the city, it's up to 80%. Because Ingalls said when Ingalls was writing, Owens' community was coming to an end. It was coming to a demise. It only could last for so long. And the reason being is because Ingalls said they're doing nothing to fight against capital. So therefore, capitalists continue to spread. You can run off and hide. That's what I mean. We just can't run off in the corner of the globe. I'm not saying you saying it. I'm just simply saying that we also got to look at it as well as that, listen, we must also organize because what changes the city? What changes pollution in the city per se? It's not just all of us living together. The pollution is coming from the mode of production. Okay? It's how they're producing their vehicles. It's how they're producing in their factories. So all of this is done by the people. And if the people don't take a stand and begin to organize enough to get enough people to make changes, then, capitalism will just continue to spread. So what used to be country turns into suburban. And then eventually turns into these towns and eventually just continue to grow. I watch the development now, just here in New York State. I mean, they developing so much into the country and penetrating into the country lands. Soon as they put up power lines and start putting municipalities in there and digging sewers, your countryside is fading. And that's what we've been watching happen. So therefore, I'm not going against what you're saying, my brother, not at all. I'm just adding to it as far as we look into organizing in the country or looking to organize in the city, we need to have a network. And also, our most important thing is to organize the people into the kingdom of God. And we have to learn and seek the Almighty to find out how we can be used to fight against capital. Because the animals, I don't know if it's happening where y'all are, but I'm seeing more and more deer and wildlife running into the cities because they losing their homes. They spread like mad because, like you said, capital must expand. So they got to go into new land, whether it's local, it's. I was in a country. I don't know if you all online, you probably heard about it, but it was the community in South Carolina, and this is where. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't. This is where I know some of you all probably heard of this guy, Pastor Dow, and but the guy who. Hold on. Are you all still on? I didn't shut you out, did I? I didn't close the call. Can you all still hear me? Say something, because I don't.
We can hear you.
Yeah, I'm still on. Yeah.
Shalom. We can hear you.
Okay, well, I don't know how I did this. Okay. Well, the guy, okay, I'm sorry. All right, I'm back now. I don't know. Okay. But the elder who assisted Pastor Dow was a elder named Robert. What's his first name? David Roberts, Sister Benai. And we went down and visited him. In fact, that's how I met Pastor Dow, was through David Roberts. And he was down in South Carolina. I think they own 53 acres of land. And they got the idea from that same Christian movement. He got it from his idea from an Alabama pastor. But I'm saying all of that because when we were down there in South Carolina, they started to post up. They had power lines up, and David Roberts was talking about them moving in for the sewers. And it's just the progression of capital that is really, it can't be ignored. I guess that's what I'm saying. I don't know why this is happening. But that's all I have to say on that, because right now I'm just trying to get my screen together. So if anybody want to add something else or any questions, but again, this is not to go against in any way with brother RJ had brought to the table. It's just I'm doing this in response to some of the doctrines going on among the different communities where people just thinking that they can just leave the city and everything gonna be okay. And again, I think a lot of that doctrine comes into because they're gonna leave the city because they still have this idea that Christ is coming in the clouds right away. And they're gonna wait into the mountains, into the hills until Christ come in the clouds. Now, if that happened, then that happens. But if it don't happen like that, then it could be problems for a lot of people. And that's why we're just bringing something else to the table to consider. And I'm not going against the divine intervention. What I'm saying is we're not clear on how that divine intervention looks. That's what I'm saying. Go ahead. Somebody about to say something?
Yes,
Yeah, I
Brother
have
Judah.
a.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, brother.
No, okay. Well, I'm gonna be real quick. This is Akish, and all I want to know is anyone that's recording these classes? Are they uploading them to YouTube? Like, where can I get these classes? Because what I do, I need these classes because I put them in somewhere. So I need to know where I can go to get these, like the previous classes that we did. That's all I wanted.
Go ahead. You want to say something? Go ahead, sister.
Yeah, I've tried to upload them to Facebook, but the files are too big, and I can't upload them directly to our website. So I'm going to have to put them on YouTube first, and then set up a link. So that's what I'm working on currently.
So yeah, brother, they are, and
Okay.
you can even the previous classes that we've done so far, not from part one, but they are recorded. Just scroll down on the conversation, and you will find them, and you can actually download them.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks.
Yep. But yeah, I hope. Go ahead. Somebody can say something.
I'm sorry, Brother Judah.
No, you're all right.
No, you were talking about the situation with Pastor Roberts and Pastor Dow and the communities there. And I think that because, we've had many a conversation in our community, about being rural or urban. And I remember when we had a group from the South come up to, want to help us, start a community, what have you, in Cuba, New York. And they were so eager to be on the land. But I remember when the sisters was getting together, we had to tell them, like, first we're trying to learn how to just love each other so we won't kill each other on the land. It didn't matter if we were on land or if we were in the city. What mattered is how we loved one another, because that will be our testimony to the world, that we are his disciples by how we love one another. And not just, of course, intimately, just amongst our group, but how we are going to evangelize, how are we going to reach out to the world, how are we going to operate amongst ourselves wherever we may be. I think in the beginning of the series, you mentioned how the church, the believers were in actually an urban area to begin with. And of course, some of them came out of rural areas and so on, but they actually started as an urban community. And it's no one way to be a community, or a group of believers or the body of Christ. We all have work to do, and the work is to spread the good news of the kingdom or the government of justice. So however that looks and what makes sense for those believers to have, for their everything to be taken care of, that is what you do. You know.
Yes. And and I would like to add too, that's true. Even how you, because that's what the Messiah was explaining. That's how the world will know that you are my disciples, right? By the love you have one towards another.
Yes.
But how would the world notice that?
Right.
Unless that you are engaged with it.
Exactly.
So again, escaping the capitalist views of love, because how they portray love is often just real, cuddly, write you a card kind of business, which sometimes love manifests itself that way. But like I've told you before, sometimes love manifests itself as throwing over tables. That's what the Messiah did. And I argue he didn't lose his love that day. He did everything in love when he did that. But when we understand love as the affection to do right, when we understand love as the affection and the desire to do what is upright, what is right ruling, what is just, and if we love our neighbor as ourselves, then it boils down to what the early Christians, they found this record among the, it's called the Gospel of the Hebrews. It's simply an old record of the Gospel of Matthew. And they have fragments of it. And its account of Matthew chapter 24, of Matthew chapter 19, when the rich man confronted the Messiah, and according to this Christian document, their response, or they're saying his response was this, much like Matthew 19, but it was said that the Messiah responded saying, how is it that you say that you love your neighbor as yourself when your house is full of goods and none of them come out of it, meaning come out of your house to your brother, who are, he said, according to the Gospel of Matthew, who are clad, use the word clad in filth and disease. So when you're looking at this ancient record of Matthew in this discourse between the rich man, it's not just as sometimes it's taught, this inner circle form of religion. We have this little circle of people who love. No, that circle of people love will be manifested when they realize that their neighbors, just as we look at the demonstration of the Messiah, he did not keep a little circle of 12 men or 70 men or 120, and he went off and lived away from the evil Roman Empire. He said, you shall be a testimony against them because you're trying to bring humanity and lead them to the road of redemption. Is that important element that draws us to the public. It drives us into the cities because that's where they are. That's where they got to be fished. And you got to go, like the Messiah said, he walked into the flame to redeem his brethren out. And that's where we have to go. And when you look at the freedom fighters, that's what they have done. So that's why it's a difference for me. I can't speak for everyone else. When I look at the Bible from the standpoint of a revolutionary, like a Maurice Bishop, and see how he risked his life and was killed because he's seen the people in Grenada in sickness and disease and filth and hunger, and he waged a war against it. It wasn't just this little isolated circle. See, the bourgeoisie do that all the time. They got their little islands, they got their little places that they go live, and they got their little circle. And the heck with everybody else. But when it comes down to the gospel of the kingdom, we can't forget the call of Abraham. Our litmus test is to see if we're going to feed his sheep. This is it. And that's why when you go back to Peter and them, if it was just about how Peter and them loved each other, and this is not going against what the sister said, just like I'm not going against what the brother said, I'm just adding more to this. If it was just about them men at that moment in time, those 120 people loving each other, then he wouldn't have told them, you're going to be my witness to the end of the world. He wouldn't have got upset when it was just them in the room, locked, with the door locked. He wanted to know, why aren't you out there doing the work? He looked at the fields and he said, look at the fields, look at the harvest is ready. Go ye and pray that the master of the harvest add laborers to the harvest. This is where we got to go. This is where it comes down to. This is how the demonstration of love is to lead and to labor and to go against the forces of darkness to help redeem, or to redeem our brothers and sisters out of this oppression and lead them to a path that will lead to justice and equity, that will lead to the redemption of man. And this is I believe this is just ignored, and I see this prevail so much among people who just learn. That's this flee Babylon. Y'all hear me talk about it all the time. People fled Babylon. Okay, you got some knowledge. Even though it's out of context, immediately what do? You ready to pack your bags and run. But you learned about it from somebody who was in the thick. You understand what I'm trying to say? Somebody who was already here in the war, you done heard it. So now you done heard it, you ready to say, bump everybody else, bump the kids, bump the children, everybody, you know what I'm saying? That just don't add up to me. So in this love teaching, I believe the demonstration is looking at the works of Paul, the works of Yeshua. Look at their works. That's what he said. You gonna tell me by my works. And you show me what works didn't involve the social activity, dealing in whether it was bringing health, relieving people of sickness, teaching them how to be made whole, teaching the people how to pool resources to bring food to the table. I mean, I think that these are the true demonstrations of love.
And Brother Jude, I just
Yes.
want to add to that. I think, and I think that's why, because a lot of people who, like for me, I know I want land, but I don't want land so that I can isolate myself. I want land because I want to reconnect to it. I want land because I think there's a lot that we can teach from reconnecting to it. I think that we have become a society where we don't know what kind of plants are medicinal. We don't know how to grow food. We really don't know how to do anything for ourselves.
Not really.
If all the food disappeared from the stores, a lot of people would starve. Yes. Because we literally don't know when people left the farms. That's right. So I think that, there's a place for that, not to try to run from it, but I think that there's something that we can teach in it.
Yes.
Like even when we look at the scripture, I think that there were many times, where it was like the wicked were going to be cut off from the land, but the righteous were going to remain in it. Right. There's something blessed, like if my people were called by my name, will turn from their wicked way and pray and repent, whatever, I'll heal the land. So I think there's something to that, and I think that part of our, somehow I can't explain it, but I think part of our withering away is because we've been cut off from it. It's not natural for us to live life and just be cut off completely from almost what we came from. I don't want to sound new ageish, but I'm trying to say, I just think there's something really powerful when we can somehow connect back to that. And so I know, like for me, if I had that, I would really want to be able to learn myself. I want to be able to teach others. I want to be able to open it up. And I think for some people, I think that's really where their heart is, not just to try to, get away from the masses of people, but they really want to learn something and reconnect so that what they learn, they can bring back to the masses and connect in a way. I just think there's more.
That's the part I have very seldom seen on that to bring back to per se. Right. But I agree. I mean, that's why we went out and we hunted and searched and bought 35 acres. Right. This idea, I don't disagree with that at all. Right. But I'm studying myself. Right. But in connection with what you're saying, somehow I'm starting to believe that connection is like a process to be connected to this land. Because there's a connection between the human being and land. Absolutely. Right? Yeah. But if the human organism is out of touch, right, then I don't think that the connection with the land it will make that connection. That's why I think that process is, you got to get the human organism in order.
Right.
And you're not gonna get them all because some gonna be wiped out.
Right.
But when he's saying feed his sheep, he know who he have out there. I got to hear this word.
Right.
When that is put in place,
Right.
then it seemed like he bring everything else.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Follow suit.
I can see
It
that.
follows suit.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything kind of falls
Yeah.
into line.
Because remember, before they can get the land
Right.
in Canaan,
Right.
they had to
They
have
themselves.
themselves. They had to come to a level
In
of
a certain way.
yes. Then he will give them this land because
Right.
so much is contingent upon the interhuman relation
Right. Right.
that I believe is even unseen. It's like a science that
Right.
that's
Like you said, if the human organism isn't right, they're not going to treat the land right anyway.
right,
You
right.
know, so
Right.
it's just it flows right into it.
Yes.
Right.
So not excluding it, but just showing, like, I guess they say where I'm wondering if, and because I can't put it as fact, but
Right.
like you say, put the cart before the horse.
Right.
In other words, what we got to do first is the human organism must come together. Because I wonder, well, Yeshua's arguments in the beginning, like, why did he send him into a rural area? I mean, into a urban area.
Right.
He didn't send him into the land right away.
Right.
He had to send him into a rural area. And then on top of it, what was happening is that people who had land
Right.
sold it
Right. I remember that.
to bring resources to help the human organism.
Right.
And then from there, God had provided houses and everything else. So it's just this process that I'm trying to figure out myself as I analyze it. But yes, I believe the land is important. And like you said, even like projects that people can do even inside of the cities, because you have medicinal plants and everything just growing out the crack of the ground.
Yeah,
Like,
I know that that's what they
they crying to us, like, you know.
Right.
But yeah, so I think all of it pretty much has its place. It's just us putting it in order.
Right.
And because if you don't do it that way, what you have a lot of isolated groups.
Right.
And it's like splintered off, and they have their little communities. But when you understand, because I think it's like their views of what this world is, to what God is trying to lead mankind to, I think it's just all different.
Right.
You know,
Right.
from either you're gonna lead the earth itself, or I don't know. But right now it just seems to me like this is a universal struggle for justice. And if we don't fight to establish justice, Yah will give us nothing. Because that's why we lost it. We lost the land. We lost the knowledge because of our interhuman relations.
Right.
Took us right out of there.
Right.
He said the land gonna spit you out.
Right.
So it's like if the land to complement us, it's like we have to have this unity among the called out ones, at least.
I was thinking in relation to kind of everything that's been said up to this point, but it kind of started with what you had said about how the capitalist ideology would have us to believe that communism would rob us of our freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing, it was probably some documentary that you had shown, where there was an older woman of Oriental descent. She was like an older lady, and she was talking about how her grandchildren were leaving their inheritance, their inherited land, because they were going off to school to be doctors and lawyers and whatever it is that the capitalist ideology has taught them.
Yeah.
So just kind of in the same vein of thought of how, like, we can't even really work the land unless we are of the right mind. Like, that's what I think of, because on top of that, if you really think that your freedoms are being taken away because, like, say, you know, I'm not sure how it actually works in the different countries who have set up or attempted to set up communism, and what people's roles and jobs ended up being.
Mm-hmm.
But I, from my understanding, my very limited understanding, it ultimately come down to everybody's working together to provide for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So if you end up getting, like, you know, you got work to do it, and it is work. Like, you ain't just gonna, you know, wait around for somebody else to do it. No, you have to work too. And I think a lot of people, especially just, you know, from the capitalist ideology, like, they they don't really think that way. Like,
Right.
and I'm talking about this manual labor. Like, most people just want to sit up in, and I'm like, you know, I sit up in the office and just work like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want to do manual
Yes.
labor, but not everybody like that.
That's
and
right.
the idea of having to do that, that's when they start to feel like they're being oppressed, because they're like, oh, I have to go and do all this work, and basically they're only getting their fair share, but their work is helping the collective.
Mhm.
So that can, if you don't have the mind of Christ, where your like love for your neighbor is embedded in your conscience, then yeah, you're gonna feel like you oppressed, because you want to have the freedom to do what you want to do for just you,
Mhm.
rather than thinking of the whole collective.
Right.
So I was just thinking how all of that kind of connects, and like
Yes.
really the at the base and the core is to really get rid of that ideology that we have ingrained in us,
Mhm.
as a society.
Individualist. Yes.
Yeah, just it's super individualist. And if you don't have that kind of mind to really want the best for the whole community, and you like, and that's that again, I feel like it is something you have to be taught, because
Mhm.
we just grew up
Yes.
in this society where you're taught you have to do everything that you need to do to take care of yourself, but that's still within the context of the capitalist economy. So that means
Yes.
you gotta go put yourself in debt so you can go get this career, which you may or may not even find a job in.
Right.
So it's like a whole bunch of
Right.
things going on in that context. But yeah, I was just thinking about how,
Yeah.
like, yeah, at the core, you really have to just have the right mindset to even go into that. Because yeah, you probably will, if you have a capitalist mindset going into that, you'll feel oppressed doing that, because you don't want to serve other people. You
Right.
want to serve just yourself.
Right.
And
And
you want to get every little bit
Every little
just
bit.
for yourself, not
Right.
for nobody else.
And don't realize you're going to lose the world that way.
Yeah.
But and again, if you're looking at it practically, this is it playing out.
Right.
Because of individualism. If we're looking at it, I would say, again, I guess the word proper way is analyzing it according to, like I said before, dialectical materialism. We're looking at the material world around you and see how everything works.
Right.
We could listen to when the Messiah says that he that loses his life in this world will gain it.
Right.
He that gain it will lose it. Well, how does that look? Well, because of your activities, the way you live in that world, speaking of the context of the Greco-Roman world, you will continue to fuel the ruling elite. If you continue to operate in what you're operating in, you will continue to give strength to the beast. It will continue, and it will rob you. You're going to lose it. Even if you become a product or become rich, the Bible even reveals that even the rich people are still consumed and they're enslaved by capital. So you're really going to lose it, other than if you lay your life down for your neighbor or your friend. And Paul said, each man prefer one before the other. Now you're talking about a society in which you will gain life. You know, that's if every man thinking that way, or if enough men thinking that way, then of course the abolition of war. Of course you're gonna have plenty of land. You're gonna have housing, everything, because of this reciprocal action among human beings. So when you're looking at it like, with how does this look materially? It's not just a fly-by-night word, mystical thing, what he's saying. It actually plays out when you look at his operations. If we labor and work for each other, you look at primitive communist societies, that's exactly how they lived. It was for the village, everything was for the team. You know, it's pretty much like that's what they say about the women who their assets as far as the society, because of the mentality in which they possess. The children were first, the village. They always, like, they would eat, like Thomas Sankara when he gave his speech on the liberation of women when Burkina Faso began to be free. He explained, he gave this thing where, you know, women, they would come eat last, they'd make sure the children ate, you know, they'd take care of the villages. And when you see how they lay their life down for the village and lay their life down for the children, well, in turn, if everyone in the village did the same thing, then that would bring more life to her. It would bring more security to her. All of these acts will bring security and life and sustenance. Right. But if we look at it our own way, right, to get our own, the society will be constantly shattered and broken up. Right. into factions, into separation. So it's a science behind what he's saying. It's more than what I understood, definitely, from reading, years ago. It's really concrete evidence behind his arguments.
Right.
Take your goods and give it to the poor. Right. Capitalist mindset, you're going to be out in the street. You're going to be begging like the poor. No. Even the idea of poor, when every man do this, you won't have any rich or poor. That's the idea of a classless society. There isn't any rich or poor.
That's why they want to keep you individualized, so they can keep you enslaved.
Yes.
Because that's what that will do.
That it'll keep us, keep classes and suppression.
I mean, it's interesting because that book, by Stephen R. Covey, and he was talking about the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, and he said the highest level is not dependence nor independence, but it's interdependence.
Interdependent, that's right.
And that's what we need.
That's the highest level.
That's really what we need to be striving for. It's even like now, like me and Josiah will have these conversations sometime because a lot of people say, oh, when your kids turn 18, they should just leave. Like because they're 18 years old, like that's a magic number or something.
Right, put them out.
Right. And so I'm like, I mean, if a young person is, productive and they're doing the, trying to make it and doing the best they can, why would you tell them they have to be like people will literally say, well, that's not normal. They should be gone by 18.
Right.
Plus,
really?
Let's talk about
capitalist ideology.
Yeah, right.
That young person can still take wisdom from their parents or from older people.
That's right.
Right. So if you just move out, I'm gonna go live with myself and do what I want to do. Right. At 18, like you only lived 18 years. This other person's lived 40, 50, 60 years.
Right. That's right.
And they can tell you what's coming ahead.
That's right.
What to expect. So
you see that the complementing in a village.
Yeah.
Right.
You have the wisdom of the elders and you have the strength of the youth.
Right.
And they both feed off each other.
You have to have both. And so what the capitalist side does is it severs relationship.
That's right.
Because even if you do that, when you talked about like the ideologies of this modern society, well, it's easy to put that on the younger generation. They don't know any better.
That's right.
And they don't have the wisdom of the older ones to say, you know what, that's destructive.
That's right.
So it's very interesting.
That's right.
When you think about it.
And they created this glitch of the elders because the elders pushed the children away.
Right.
But now look at the condition. The first generation, or looking into the first and second generations of the broken up of extended families, you created this new phenomenon of nursing homes.
Right.
Look what has been created. Yeah. See, the elders, it's like in the book of the law, you had the men who labored in the tabernacle 50 years old, you could retire as far as because they carried the load. Right. Now they're just instructors. The young people come up. Right. You're going to carry, I'm going to tell you what to do. Right. You now, that wisdom and that strength work together. This is the strength of the society. Right. But that individualism, that separation, like you're saying, it is destroying us to this day. Right. So how do the people learn about interdependence? We have somehow separated it from, it's separated from the Western gospel. Yeah. But it's not separated from the Bible gospel. When we talk about interdependence, when we talking about liberation, when we talking about abolishing all forms of oppression, this should be intertwined with the gospel. But it's separate speech in Western biblical teaching. So therefore, these are always like separate conversations. We got to bring this together. This interdependence got to be a part of this is what God wants. So you can really see how it plays out instead of you waiting to see some stuff materialize out of the thin air. It's the human beings that brings this to pass. So now that's why God can say, how is that you turn my glory into shame? Everything I have created. How did a human being turn this into shame? Because of our activity. So now he's telling our activities must change. Interdependence could sum it up in one word. Yes. Both my parents were born on and raised on farms and hated that life. My grandparents as well. She hated tennis because of how they were exploited. She came up here, she didn't never want to go back down south. They welcome an urban existence, getting out of the field. Today, young Black people would rather live in urban environments than do the work required on the farm. Sometimes I wish I had that background because I know what I know now could be living different life. Missouri has 2 urban cities which are governed by rural communities. St. Louis and Kansas City don't receive resources until the rural counties are paid first. Yes, that's an interesting dynamic too, which is common. But you know what made work so deplorable? And when we think of work and labor on a farm, and even when we think about, because we're going to finish this off, our last week in part 2 is going to talk about, they're going to sum it up like I believe it's in part 2. Everybody in society going to have to work. But again, our idea of work is oppressive in capitalism. But if your idea of work is to provide what we need, we probably only need to work 2 hours a day. If that, to provide an abundance, the work carries an entirely different outlook, don't it?
I feel like you look at capitalism, right? You got all these people at the top, and they're not working at all.
They don't work at all, right?
These people work 8, 10, 12 hours a day for these people
That's right.
up here.
That's right.
Right? But if everybody was working, they took some of their hours away, you know what I'm saying? It wouldn't be the way it was.
No, it wouldn't. And again, and then your idea of work would transform. Not 40 hours a week, not 120 hours a week, not 90 hours a week. But social scientists have argued you will probably only have to work 10 hours just to provide what you need. Just what you need. I mean, when I mean what you need, I don't mean your bare sustenance. I mean to live comfortable. You understand what I'm trying to say? Right. So when you're looking at the book of the law where he's saying in an agrarian society where most people lived off the land and they were workers in the fields, an entire year, nobody have to work. You just eat. Well, in order to conceptualize that, then you have to understand, have this idea, how does that play out? And the Torah mentions it. You don't worry about what y'all gonna eat that year. You're gonna have enough store that you won't even be eating the new stuff. This is not some hocus pocus. This is literal science. If you do what I tell you to do, the cattle gonna bring forth land in abundance. If you don't till a land in the 7th year, every 7th year, like I've been telling you to, each year is gonna compost back into the ground. Each year your food gonna come back bigger and better. You know what I mean? So he's showing you where you're gonna actually, if you follow the path that he set up, and every nation did it, you will really recreate the Garden of Eden globally. It's not a hocus pocus idea. This is really scientific. But because we done made the Torah religious, we don't see the science as what he's saying. And once you can grow it like that, where all you got to do is after you finish eating the apple and you just toss it back, you mean to tell me a tree gonna start growing? You ain't got to do nothing. It just start to grow. Right. That's not fictitious. You have people with land like that. Right. That's what he's explaining. How much work you need to do now? Each year, my grandmother worked that land that we have over here in the city. Every year she worked. That's the best part of our garden. Every year it got easier. She didn't even have to turn over. She didn't have to do much because the land was so soft and fertile. She didn't have to do much. It wasn't like the very first year was clay. But each year in, year out, she barely had to do anything to that land. So when you're looking at what the Creator is saying, and when we start to look at work, and then you have, let's say, 100 people build a house. You can build a house in a day or so. 100 people working. So your work changes dramatically, right? So all that to say is that even our ideas of work, why did our parents want to leave the farm? Why my grandmother hated it? Because she told me why. One thing, they were cheated. No matter how much they brought in, they were always in debt. And they had to work long hours. Okay? And then when she came up north, she said she had to scrub floors for rich folks. Messed up her knee. I remember all these stories as a child just growing up. My grandmother, telling me these things. Both of them on each side telling me what they have went through. Yes, you will hate work. But work in a socialist or a communist society changes entirely. You will enjoy it. You can stop when you want to. It won't drain you of all your energy. You have plenty of time to enjoy life and art.
So she traded one person for another one, basically, I guess.
Pretty much.
But the question I wanted to ask is, so would you say that there has really ever been a true, I mean, I know there has in the past, but like recently, and can't say that for any Western culture, but I don't know, has there ever really been any true communist society? Because I know you said anytime you deviate from what truly is that, then it no longer is that. So even when you look at the USSR at the time that it was in existence, was it a true communist society? Or were there elements of oppression in that society that did no longer? Because can you really be a true, pure communist society without having an understanding of the kingdom? Because you as an individual and a society have to have a understanding of what love your neighbor as yourself.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
To actually have that happen.
You're absolutely right.
So I guess my question is, do you think that there's actually been one?
Never. And in fact, the name is the USSR,
Right.
the United Socialist Soviet Republic. See, they called themselves socialists.
Right.
They didn't know how. The leader of the revolution, Lenin, in his own writing said they don't know how communism will come about.
Right.
All the countries who the West called communists, they never considered themselves communists.
Right.
So the USSR, Cuba, they never considered themselves communists. China, because they knew communism will only work, as we read in the manifesto, communism will only come about when there is an absolving or an abolishing of the state, meaning that there isn't any hierarchy.
Right.
Until then, they're saying, so we actually going to finish up, I believe, with this in part 2. That's going to be our last one in part 2 before we go to part 3. They're saying that the socialism is when the ruling class, the rich or the poor, must take possession of the resources by force. Meaning they got to take away this man's right to own all of his land. Now he become oppressed because he don't have the liberty to hoard the wealth. Right. So oppression exists on that scale. But the idea is that when that will dissolve, where you won't have any elements of the society like that, that's when communism will come. So even when you look at the writings of Engels and Marx, none of them even, they said that comes later. First, it's always socialism. And that's the same, like I tell people online, that's the same pattern you find in the Bible. Moses had to institute a state. Yeshua or Yehoshua is bringing a classless society. The people themselves are the kings and priests. They all become the state. But in Moses' day, you had the state. And they had to administer these laws because you had people out of order. So communism is what is to come. Like you said, you can't do it without the spirit. Right. Marxism didn't call it the spirit. They call it this mentality of when man will learn how to treat one another as pretty much like brothers. So no, it hasn't been. And none of them ever claimed to have had created one. Just the West teaches that.
That's from the beginning, though. The first two brothers. Right? I said from the beginning, the first two brothers with Cain, right? What do you mean? Like, I don't know. I just kind of drawn the conclusion back to with Cain and Abel, right? Yes. Yeah, and it just seems to even start with that and that whole issue, of equity, even back in the beginning. Right? Yes,
according to the written records, you have oral records. I think Josephus wrote from an oral record of Cain robbing the resources, taking them by force. And then you have a lot of oral tradition in this record called Jasher. It's a lot of oral tradition and legend in this book. And they give a record of Cain and Abel arguing over land. So when you look and read in between the lines of the Hebrew oral traditions, it boils back down to this one trying to take and possess. Well, in fact, that's what Cain name mean, actually.
Which would make sense why he would accept his offering.
Right,
If
exactly.
If he was working, he was doing stuff like that.
Exactly.
Behind the scenes.
Exactly. And why everywhere he go, the land won't yield his strength. It's not taboo. But if you are robbing the land for resource, it's not going to yield its strength. Opposed to, what was Abel doing? He letting his animals feed his animals take care of that earth. Right. Cain just wanted to take from the earth. Right. And therefore it brought problems. So when we're looking at it, I say scientifically, this is what this Bible is. It only becomes taboo or hocus pocus when we don't understand that science. You know what I'm saying? It's like people didn't know why a person got sick. A spirit. Well, you can call it a spirit if you want, because it's unseen. But then now they understand, well, no, man, it's constant stuff floating in the air. It's germ, you know what I mean? So now they have a science, this material application they can apply to it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
When people sneeze, this, these stuff comes from it, that you don't know. So the entire Bible that I'm learning is really science. And there is explanations behind what God is explaining or what God is conveying to us. We just got to tap into it. If we want this world of paradise and peace, I believe that we really got to dig deep to find out our part in it, because the Bible seems to be showing that, listen, we play a big part in this, more than what we have been led to believe. And if Satan could teach us and convince us we don't play a part, then he can destroy us. Yes, he can destroy us. I'm sorry, somebody want to, go ahead and cut me off. I've been running it off. Go ahead, cut me off. Go ahead and say something.
Shalom, brother.
Shalom, shalom, brothers and sisters.
Shalom, shalom. Brother Chicha, may you please maybe just reflect back here. In the beginning, you mentioned you mentioned that in slavery, we lost of it. You mentioned like the culture and the language and the writing skills.
Yeah, culture and science.
Yes, I'm more interested on the writing skills and the language. Can you go a bit? How do we lost the writing skills? Because I'm beginning to understand exactly. Yes, like here, when we grew, long ago, it sounds as if on this side we were not writing, we didn't know how to write. But other things like how to feed ourselves, no, that is not an issue. We can see that people manage to feed themselves because the land was was enough. People knew how to plant things according to seasons. So on the writing skills, maybe how do we lose the writing skills?
Y'all go and get some rest, man. Y'all trying to hang out all night. we lost the skills here. We lost the skills here in this land because it was illegal for the slaves to read and write. And that went on for centuries, where they had to sneak and do it, and you can be killed or fined if you were caught teaching a slave how to read or write. So that's how it happened here. And yes, that's how that happened. That's how that happened here. And I was comparing it to the women because that seemed to have also happened globally, where a great percentage of women globally are illiterate. They're not allowed to read. That's how you lose it. They won't allow you, the powers that be won't allow you to learn that skill. They won't allow you to learn it. And that's why, again, I guess, so learning and understanding is so precious. And that's why I think education is a must, because we have to take the Most High have beat back the powers to allow us to regain some literacy. And we have to take full advantage of what's been presented. And we got to, because he said the people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. And he told the prophets, write it all down in the book. So his intention is for us to learn and read. And that's a blessing. And, it's a blessing to be able to do that. And so we definitely got to take full advantage, because right now he beat the powers back. But what the powers are doing now, they're trying to take away so much time that they could barely find time to do it. So that's another thing. And the time that they do have, it's so much leisure that they don't read, where reading becomes a burden to many people, So but primarily, to answer your question, is because they stopped by force, by law. We couldn't teach the people.
Including the language.
Well, you was able to speak the language, but you couldn't write it or read it. You can speak the language but still be illiterate. So if as long as they could talk, they could make out the sounds. But when it come down to setting a book in front of them, it's just pages with a bunch of marks on it, a bunch of markings. So yeah, that's how that happened.
Yeah, currently, yes, like here on our side, when it comes to losing the language, my understanding is that here you can influence other cultures, or you can make people change their language by introducing or promoting the culture that you want to advance, like English here. Everybody needs to, everyone, if you don't speak English, you'll be seen, or you'll be seen as somebody who's at low level, and you'll be ignored. You won't be recognized by those who are well educated.
Yeah.
Eventually people tends to run away on using their language, your mother tongue, because of the condition around you. That's how people lose language. Are supposed to.
Not necessarily. I think that you really should analyze that a little more. It's more to it than just the speaking of English. You could speak your own language and speak English. So, and the stigma that goes along with speaking English is still somewhat separate from just speaking English. So you could speak English, and it's how we been taught to look at it. Meaning, okay, to speak, you could look at it in one sense where you don't necessarily lose your culture or lose your language learning another language. In fact, the Apostle Paul spoke several different languages. He spoke Greek, but by no means did he ever change the Hebraic culture for the Greek culture. But what he was able to do was break the barriers. So, I mean, I'm not sure where you're going with it, but I think teaching people one language, for example, you don't necessarily have to lose your culture. We have to separate those two ideas. But if you look at learning one language, what it does, it helps the revolution because it breaks language barriers. So, that was sort of demonstrated on the day of Pentecost, where you had men who spake Galilean. When they spoke, they was understood by men who spoke all of these other different languages and whatever nations they were under. So I don't think that I mean, you can speak in a different language. It's okay. In fact, it's beneficial if you're doing it for the right reasons. And it doesn't necessarily equal losing your culture. That it's more than that. When they speak English to you, they also give you an ideology that's causing you to lose your culture. It's not the English language per se. It's the garb. It's the
Yeah, 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 yeah. You're right if you put it in that way. Perhaps I failed to put it in on the right context, because actually what I've seen when you grew up here, somehow, because of the development that is happening, people are migrating to cities. Then by doing so, your child will grow up, in the city, mixing with other races, where English it's a language of communication. Then somehow people tends to these youngsters, they tend to lose their language. But I mean, by growing up in this environment in cities, uh, us as parents, we end up also, communicating with them using language, English. So
yeah, it's the
that,
ideology that they feeding the children. Same thing here. Yeah, it's the culture's ideology. That's the problem. I don't think it's necessary them speaking English.
mm,
It's all of the values and everything that they're teaching the children there to become. I think we discussed it in earlier classes how um, the bourgeoisie, as it spreads, it turns the most barbaric nations, who they call barbarian nations, into civilization. And so the civilization is the bourgeois pattern, and that's the problem. So no matter what language we speak, that don't equal taken away from our culture. It's the bourgeois um, ideology. It's their principles. It's all what comes along with their culture. That's the problem. So now you got to use the English or whatever language it is to bring a new ideology and culture, because you could still express any culture in any language. Like we can express the Hebrew culture in English, right?
mm,
You know what I'm saying? So it's really bringing back the teachings, the ideals
mm,
of the culture of God. That's what it leads to. But no, I wouldn't say it's just the English is just a part of that package that's transforming the culture where you are. It's just a
mm,
part of that package, but it's deeper than the language, I would argue. Because the same thing happening here. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. The values that people had here. Even as far as respect for elders, and it's leaving. You know, um, the it's just it's happening here. So it's what the bourgeois is teaching us, and what they're teaching us to pursue. Whether it's in music, whether it's in business, it's a dangerous culture.
that's
But yes, he used the separation of languages as a weapon, and on the Tower of Babel. In fact, I think Brother RJ brought this out in our earlier classes, showing that one language. See, Marxism also argues that the bourgeoisie, they're digging their own graves because they're equipping the proletariat with the tools to overthrow them. And one of the greatest barriers is language. So even if whether it's French or whether it's English, if you begin to create a one language, the only way that language it could be problematic if the culture being conveyed through that language is problematic. But if you use this one language to bring forth a culture of redemption and the overthrow of oppressors, then that language or that common language or that one language becomes your friend. You could communicate. Like on the slave ships, they purposely had different people or different tribes and clans on it so they couldn't communicate. They would always be in a division. Like our family just posted y'all over money. What happened in the Tower of Babel? Yeah. So language could be an asset. We just have to convey the right message through it. And because that's one of the hurdles now, trying to convey this message in different languages. Appreciate you, family over there. I thank you. It's a pleasure, and it's helpful for us to know that the people enjoy the classes, and helps us keep going, so we definitely appreciate you all saying that. And we're thankful for you all too, taking the time out while we're learning together, So yeah, it's really, it's an adventure. I think an adventure is ahead, That's what I tell people while we learning this stuff. It's an adventure. And my grandmother used to tell me the Bible is a living word. And I began to understand what she means, because it's applicable to once you understand it, or you begin to understand the living organisms and the material world around us, it brings more of an understanding to the Bible. And it's like, I'll give you a quick example of what I mean. I remember years ago we would do the law reading, and we had a question on why, if a dead insect or a dead animal, if you found an unclean dead insect or the carcass on a clay bowl or a clay pot, the Torah said you got to break it to pieces. Now, living in our world, we bought our plates. You understand what I'm saying? We bought them from the store, and you just can't really conceptualize breaking your plate if a dead insect, number one, if it falls on it. So this is a different mentality from people who made their plates out of clay. They could make another one the next day. Okay, but why did you have to break the clay plate? And this is where the outside science come in, because it's porous. And what it does, it sucks in any kind of uncleanness that come from the carcass of that insect or that carcass of that animal. So that's when reflecting on that, I begin to learn why understanding what's happening in our material world helps us understand the Bible more in depth. And I remember a mother, she brought it out because of her knowledge on, pottery. Yeah, them things are porous. It could suck up germs, But if it's wooden or steel, you just wash it. But if it's porous, you got to destroy it. So that's just an example of understanding our material world and man in it and his duties. I believe it helps us understand more on what this Bible is talking about. It's an adventure. That's all I can say. We learn more and more as we study and research, and most of all, stay in prayer. Y'all heading up.
Well, actually, I'm probably gonna stay down here for a while, but you'll probably head up. So.
Okay, yeah.
I'll be down here.
All right. So, education, that's the key. And the more we learn and the more we put it to practice, the scripture said, good understanding have all they that do his commandments. So when we're following his legislation, more will unfold. We will begin to understand more. You know what I mean? And God willing, we'll make it through this. We got to make it through. They say salvation is, the scriptures say the prophets show salvation is near. And we got to make it through. And most importantly, we got to find that road. When our master teaches us that few there be that even find the road, then we got to do a diligent search of this road. And then we got to walk the road. So we got to stay in prayer. So where did we leave off? I think we left, just so everybody know. I don't know who have the internet copies or who have the Phil Gasper copies. But in the internet copy that you get off of Marxist.org, I believe we will begin at undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical. Yeah, we're gonna, as we close out, we're gonna actually deal with this. This again, we're gonna pick it up, as I was saying earlier. Part 2 begin to close with this battle of ideas. Really understanding that our ideas got to change, but our ideas change from our material world that's around us. Okay. And so physically, since we don't see the change physically taking place at this moment, we have to understand how our physical world came to be. And once we begin to research and understand how our physical world, and when I mean our physical world, I don't mean how the trees grew and all of that. I'm talking about our social environment. How did it come about? Why did it come about? And when we start to examine what made this material world, then we could see the antithesis of it. Okay, because you could see where it come from. And that's when we could start to analyze these ideas as far as the ideas that created this world. The ideas that created for man to conduct himself as individualists, to compete, why he's competing for bread and everything else. And then when we research other societies, because the Creator has made all this available to us, then that's what allow us to tap into a different material environment. Even though it's not realized yet, it has been realized. And that's why it's important for us to search history to see it. You understand what I'm saying? And that's where we can begin to deal with this process of renewing our minds. And the Torah is a vital, the entire Bible really shows us this world, this material world of justice and equity, and why it would eradicate hunger, why it would no more crying, no more tears. The sun shall not smite them by day. No more, what are you saying? No more hunger, and the sun shall not smite you. You don't have no shelter, you don't have no food. So we're learning through the Bible this new material world around us. But yet the Bible have given us images and glimpses of this material world in its rudimentary stages through previous revolutions that have taken place throughout the world. And the ruling class simply don't want us to know about it, because that's when we'll be able to begin to change our ideas, because we'll be able to see a different material world. And once we can conceptualize a different material world, then we could bring it about, which will further bring it into, it will solidify it. Like, we can have this idea, but once we can conceptualize it, and then the Most High will begin to bring it to pass through our works, then now we will create this material environment that will solidify, or it will make it concrete. And then we will actually it will begin to complement each other. We're going to have a material world of heaven, and we will have our ideals will be based on heaven. And you all know what I mean by heaven, I hope. Justice, equity, peace, concern for one another. And our environment, like what Paul explained it too. When Paul said, provoke one another to love, this is what he's describing. Create a material environment to cause each other to want to do for each other. Because if you're in an environment where everybody's stealing and scheming, that's going to provoke you to go for yourself. You understand? So that environment provokes that reaction. But if you in an environment where you got people, man, who just trying to labor, who got the best, your well-being is on their mind, and they're laboring, they're willing to do their fair share of work or even more, that helps you, to do or provoke one another to love. Yes, he said, I'm sorry, I missed a couple of comments. Yes, it is practical. It is. Once we, I get, we're going to see as we close with section 2, this idea of our ideas. It's really a battle of ideas. That's why it's a war of words. That's why the Messiah, if you notice Revelation, he had the sword come out of his mouth. This signifying, you're speaking. So this is in the realm or in a sphere of ideas and concepts and perceptions. That's very important. That's what we create. That's the creative nature of man. Yes, I can see that, but we lack education. Yes, we do. Yes, that is, we lack education. We are loaded with garbage in this world of capitalism. Sometimes I feel emotional and look on how we have been systematically abused. Yes, we have. We have. Yes, they spend so much time miseducating us. Didn't know how bad this system was until I learned what the B system was. See? There you go. And we see the process happening now. Once we're being introduced into a new world, and we're being introduced into a new ideas, or introduced into new ideas, this is the foundations of changing the world. This is the foundation of changing the world. It's just going to happen. You won't be able to stop it. It's going to be voluntary. Once your mind changes, and then God knows, once it reaches a higher consciousness, and you're teaching others about it, what man can do is just unbelievable. And that has been subdued. And the Creator said it in the Tower of Babel, like Yahweh Ramani brought up with the Tower of Babel. If you notice the language, he said, man is one. Unless we go down and confound their language. Let me read it so I won't misquote it. Because it's a text that we have used here. This text is profound. And Genesis 11. He said they got to go down and confound their speech. And verse 6. In Genesis 11 and verse 6, it says, and Yahweh said, behold, the people is one. And that's what he's calling us to, a oneness in righteousness, right? So but here they have become one in wickedness. And they have all one language. They can understand one another. And this they began to do, which was build the tower. But notice this, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. You see that? You see it, just this passage alone. We're looking at ideas and perceptions. And so whatever the human being can conceptualize, he have the potential with unity to bring it about. Nothing can be restrained. So therefore, if just as they wanted to create the Tower of Babel, This teaches me that enough human beings who's been called and united, you won't know who they are unless we go out and do the work to spread the message so they could join. And we're learning once enough people join that remnant according to the election of grace, if he's testifying now there's nothing that will be restrained from them, that means if they want to create heaven, they can do that too. Only the devil teaches that we can. If you look at it, if you stand back from the forest or stand back from the trees and observe the forest, Satan lets you know you have full range and capacity to create hell and do all forms of evil and war. This is what this spirit teaches us. We have full capabilities to do evil. But we are limited in creating heaven. Don't that sound kind of fishy when we analyze it scientifically or philosophically? If Satan wouldn't that be the best thing going to teach us that you can't make heaven? You're only equipped to make hell. But in order to make heaven, you're going to need God, which is true. But then he teaches us, but you can't do it. He's going to do it when he comes. Satan deceived the whole world. So again, that Genesis 11:6 is powerful. Nothing will be restrained from them. What does that mean? Nothing will be restrained from them, right? That they have imagined to do. So if we become united, like the Messiah teaches us in John chapter 12, 13, 14, and 15, and 16 and 17, to love one another, to be one with one another, united, to have one heart, think the same thing, one heart, one soul, one mind. You see what the Bible teaching us? Once we become one, and whatever we put our imaginations to. Remember what the Messiah said? Whatever you ask for in my name, you will get it. Well, in order for you to ask for anything, you have to conceptualize it. It has to be an idea. It has to be in your imagination. So whatever you ask for. So what are we asking for? Are we asking for heaven? But if we looking at heaven from the capitalist idea of heaven, then that's kind of hard to conceptualize, isn't it? It's rather abstract, We be in the clouds, we going somewhere we don't know. That's kind of hard to conceptualize the Western ideal of heaven. But the biblical ideal of heaven, it's in our grasp, I'm thinking. I'm believing. But then Isaiah said, who believes the report? The tower was in a plane to control the natural resources. It was prime location to control the water. Yes, absolutely. That's right. That Fertile Crescent, up in that Fertile Crescent area. That's why they called it, because it was in an area where they could control the resources. And when they made brick and mortar instead of stone and slime, it's the change in the means of production. Yes, it was. And even the science to make, if you notice what it said about the brick, something else that the Bible teaches us that can possibly go unnoticed if it's not looked at, if you will, for lack of a better word, scientifically. It says that verse 3, and they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. Now, again, that's where outside knowledge help us understand more what the scripture says. Why say burn it thoroughly? Because the more heat you put upon a brick, the stronger it becomes. And if you're going to build a tower, then you're going to have massive amount of weight on the bottom bricks. And you have to have the bottom brick so strong that it won't burst under the weight. So this passage in Genesis chapter 11 is teaching us science. These men were scientists. They built brick kilns. They knew the science of brick making, signifying an intelligence. They, from fire and clay to create, and they knew that how did they know if they heat it up thoroughly, how do they know they'll make a stronger brick? So that's what I'm saying. When you're looking at the Bible, it's a book of science, and it's teaching us so much stuff without saying it. But that's when you have to analyze the material world around you. It's not that, what happened? These guys woke up one day and they knew how to make brick. You understand? But no, we're talking about if we analyze the material world around them, it fills in more clues on what's happening. And that's a good point. Like you said, you bring it out, the Fertile Crescent, where they built this. The change, and they didn't just use stone. They began a production process of brick making. Just a change in the use of resources. And actually, I've learned that that's why Alexander the Great wanted to rebuild Babylon, because of its location. And he wanted to be a center where all the nations of the world, that would be the center point of their trade and market. And I believe you could find that record in a book called Babylon. It's just simply called Babylon. And the last name is Camptor. I can't remember his first name. But I have used it before in other teachings. But I can't remember the author's name right offhand. But it's simply called Babylon. So yes, education, and I mean the right education. And is yet to be seen what the Most High revealed to us, but just stay in prayer. And God willing, we will be doing more classes on it, because as we learn, we want to share with the people. And in order for us to change our ideas, we got to see different societies. And I definitely want to do a campaign, because I don't see much of it happening. Really bringing more out, scientifically speaking, about women and revolution. I definitely want to deal with that more too. It's Camptor. I believe it's spelled C-A-M-P. I don't think it's an H. I think it's Camptor, T-O-R. Yes, something like that. But if you remind me, if you're in class tomorrow, if you remind me, I can, or in fact, I could text it to you. So if any of you want it, I can text it to you. God willing, I can text you the authors of that book. Because I believe I have both of your numbers, and y'all over money if you want it. I can text you, yes. And I have seen them on Amazon. Our regular Sabbath classes. Our regular Sabbath classes are tomorrow. But it's not on this line. And I haven't spoken too much about the Sabbath class, because I wasn't sure if people, deal with classes in other places. But yes, we have Sabbath classes here. And it's in another group. But if you are interested, which I was going to ask people at the close of these these classes. But if you're interested, you're definitely welcome to attend. It's definitely open. I don't know, Sister Benai, you still online? Shalom, good night, sister. Shalom to you. You didn't look at that video, Nishan? His number should be on that video. Check it out. If you don't see it, let me know. Because again, I don't have my phone with me again tonight. People get after me because I leave that thing. But yes. So yeah, if you are interested, I think she got off the line, but Brother Akish, I can I wonder if we can call you in the group anyways. I'll check tomorrow and see if you want to get into the Sabbath group. Is another group we have, the Nazarenes Bible Study, New Nazarenes Bible Study. And we could probably actually pull you in since we got your name. But yeah, our law reading starts at 2:30. And our afternoon class starts between 4:30 and 5. Yes, sir. Y'all could turn that, if y'all want, y'all could turn that thermostat up a little more here. Just radiate some more.
Oh yeah.
Little something. Yeah. Because I think they turned it down for. So I guess we'll close it for this evening. And we'll be, God willing, we'll finish off part 2 next week. Good night and shalom. Look at me, I'm up.
I was about to ask if you wanted to read the articles that we're working on. I was like, you probably need to get yourself.
What articles y'all working on?
I'm trying to get the newsletter out this Monday. So Josiah wrote an article.
Okay.
I wrote an article. I don't know if Deidre got to hers, but
okay.
Maybe not. But either way, I'm trying to get it out before the month is over, at the very least.
Right. So that's what, Wednesday?
Yeah, I'm trying to actually just get it out the way after this weekend. We'll see how the Most High have it play out.
Okay.
But ideally, I would like to have it out by Monday.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we're trying to review it.
That's it. I appreciate it. Thank you, family. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Shalom. All right, so what I'll do, I'm going to close it down and end the recording so it can be available so people who want to